this is the 26th version, our 26th year of holding the Central Valley Birding Symposium. And many of you have been part of it all 26 years, which I'm always amazed by. If we were live, I would ask, how many people have been here all 26 years or 25 or 20? And I'm always amazed at how many people are there for all of the years. Can't do that this year because we just can't really see each other and do all that. It's just not the same. And I want to say from the get-go here, sorry that we are not live. And barring like a catastrophe in 2023, we will be live. I am confident that we will be able to hold the event live next year. Again, barring significant where it's going to be impossible, but we will be live because I know that everyone is missing it. And I know I'm missing it, and everyone on the committee sure is missing it. It's just not the same. And now this is our third year. And wow, it just feels very, very strange to not be able to see you folks and interact with you. So we will be live next year. In spite of that, in spite of the fact that we are now in our third year where we have not been together, I'm amazed and just impressed. And I think it says a lot about the fact that what we got going over the many years, 20 plus years, is keeping us strong. Many of you know a lot of small nonprofits have not survived during this time. And I think a big part of why the Central Valley Bird Club and this event is going forward is because, number one, fortunately, we had years to build upon. That's number one. And we have a really, really good, loyal membership. And a big part of that is when we get together at the symposium and we can share together and essentially be like a family. And I've been kind of the main head person for this for all these years. And I'm often the one speaking at the front like I am now. And that is a big important thing for me and for the committee. And when we're together, I feel family. It's really difficult for me personally to kind of interact with you in this way, to not see you and engage with you and have you respond to me, because it's not the same. It's not family. But nonetheless, in my mind, as I'm doing this, I am picturing all of you in the room there at the Hilton, the big ballroom, everything wide open. You're all laughing, you're all drinking something, we're chit-chatting, and that is helping me. That is helping me to do this. It's helping me to go forward, and it for sure helps me to look forward to next year. So I want to thank all of you just for that long-term, steady membership, loyalty, support for the event and for the club. And for those of you that are brand new, thank you for joining. This is difficult for you probably if you're joining for the first time to have it be this way, but next year, I hope you come back live and you will be rewarded. This is a very, very fun group. Our event is one of the very best, and we will have that again. And we will enjoy the whole fellowship of birders and like-mindedness and all the stuff that goes with that next year, I promise you. But in the meantime, we're going to do it this way again, and we will make the best of it. And with Jen's help, we will do it as good as we did last year. And I think last year was very well done, very well received, and we will do that again. So before I kind of get started on things, I just want to say a few things in terms of acknowledgement. We as a symposium committee have remained very, very active. We meet together still regularly. And I just want to, again, remind you, for those of you that who those people are, it's Pat Bacchetti, Frances Oliver, who is, again, on a boat right now, which is good for her. And she's there with Lily Douglas. So Lily is also part of this thing, but the two of them are in the Antarctica. Susie Nishio, Linda Cliff, Chris, and then my wife, Sue, and I. So we are the committee that has worked with this event now for quite a few years. We continue to do it, and we look forward to seeing you all in person next year. But as always, we remain available to you. So anytime you want to give us feedback, anytime you want to get in contact with us, our names are right there, available either by email. You can text us. We want to know what you're thinking. We want your suggestions at all times. And we look forward to being with you next year. And we are very happy to continue to be part of the symposium and the Bird Club. So again, we have a great joy doing that. I want to just, that we continue to always have a lot of sponsoring entities that are part of the symposium. And that has been one of the lifebloods of this event and the club. Those different sponsorships continue to help out even during this time when we haven't been able to meet together. In particular, I know there's two groups in particular. Remind me who they are, Pat.
The joint venture.
Joint venture, California joint venture. And that's okay. And there are so many of you as individuals that continue to give above and beyond to the club and to the event. And so thank you. Can't exist without it. And again, we remain healthy with that. Pat will say more about that when she gives the president message in a little bit here. But again, we're very thankful for that. Otherwise, we are going to now proceed, and the programming for this evening is going to be great. As always, we're going to start off. The first kind of program will be the bird panel, and that'll go on at 5. So we need a little bit of time to kind of set things up. So it's not going to come on immediately here. It's going to be at 5, and then we'll follow up this evening with a great program by Alan Fish talking about raptors. But again, I want to thank you for joining in, and look forward to seeing you all in person sometime soon. I know there are field trips going on. They went on today, and they will go on continuously tomorrow and Sunday. We thought that that was one way that we could still do something live together. And so we did that this year. For those of you that went on a field trip today, I hope things went well. I miss not being able to know what you guys saw, and we have that all available. I believe that everything is going to be available kind of online, maybe on eBird. And we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit here as to how you can see what we saw. So for those of you that went on the trips, I hope you had a good time. And I would imagine some of you may still be out on a trip. And so you're going to maybe get this as a recording, and hopefully you're seeing a lot of really good things. But anyway, I'm going to kind of close for now. We're going to take a break for a couple of minutes here, and then we'll have Pat come on and kind of give a president's message. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to have everybody here this afternoon, and just want to reiterate that we're going to be really happy to be live again next year, if as long as there's no other major catastrophe in the world. But thanks for supporting the club. Like David said, a lot of small nonprofits went out of business during COVID. And because of all of you, the club is still in great shape. We have over 300 members. Financially, the board has been, we're sound financially. And we've been doing a lot of things. We've been meeting about every quarter, and, trying to keep things going for everybody. So I really want to thank Susie Nishio for being registration and kind of doing everything. That means that she does everything. And she's really kept everybody on task this year. Linda Pittman, too, has been big help behind the scenes. Cliff field trips. Frances, of course, is always in the background, and even when she's in Antarctica, and Lily as well, and Jen Hodge is just really great to work with, and we're really lucky to have her. So what we've done this year, Dan Arola, board member Dan Arola, has really keeps conservation of local issues, particularly in the Sacramento Valley. He keeps really good scientific input to policy decisions involving conservation issues for valley birds, and always has thoughtful and well-informed comments that the club can enter. So we have a presence in policy, which is wonderful. Lily also keeps us, because Lily works for the joint venture and the federal government. Lily also keeps us plugged into what's going on policy-wise there. So having these professionals on the board is really remarkable. Dan also runs the Central Valley Birds, our quarterly publication, which now, a lot of these articles he's made sure have become peer-reviewed. And for a small club, a small regional bird club like us, having publication like that is really amazing. So all of your support for publications is really welcome. And it costs money to publish that thing. It costs money to mail that thing. And just so you know, too, don't forget that past issues are available on the club website. You can access all of those old issues. They go on a year after it's been sent out, and people use that. Our articles get cited in scientific publications. So Dan Arola is responsible for all of that. And again, for a small bird club, in the last 2 years, we've published 2 publications. I can't show them on Zoom because they make the screen go crazy. But Dan published the monograph on Western purple martins, a highly endangered species in this neck of the woods. And then our own Ed Pandolfino, Lily Douglas, and Tim Manolis published the 30-year comparison of the Sacramento breeding bird atlas. Chris Kennard too. Sorry, Chris. Those are our 4 authors. And they gathered new information about the breeding birds in Sacramento County, and Ed P. and Lily did the data analysis. And it's one of the few times that a breeding bird atlas got published a second time in a county, and the club published that. So that's, you have to all pat yourselves on the back and being a members of the bird club to have something. I've been told by academic, field biologists and ornithologists, I can't believe that you guys have published 2 really, significant works like that. The other thing that happened this year, Lily Douglas has driven this, is we have a diversity and inclusion committee, and John Harris is on the board, is a member of that committee. Chris Swarth from WFO, and Paul Miller from Sacramento Audubon has been instrumental. And Paul is going to be leading a field trip, a rockin' bird field trip, a rollin' bird field trip with a symposium, I think tomorrow on the UCD campus. So we're reaching out, we're trying to make birding available to people that have more limited mobility. And member Penelope Collins, her son, who lives in Fresno, notified her of the bird club. And Penelope is another veterinarian that lives in Oakland. And Penelope has been really dedicated to helping the club come up with statements that reach out to more than the traditional birding community. So that's been something that's happened that I've been really pleased with in the last year. And we're going to try to get some more field trips going in the future, and reach out to you as look after the first of the year. We're going to reach out to the membership and kind of ask you what you would like to see the club be and where you would like to see field trips. So that's kind of what's happened with the club and the board. So we still remain active and we still remain strong because of all of you. And that's kind of it. So at in 15 minutes at 5 o'clock, Ed Harper's going to come on and have the bird ID panel, which everybody looks forward to every year. And then at 7 o'clock, Alan Fish from the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory in Marin County will be giving the keynote speaker and the keynote address. And so we'll be back with you in about 15 minutes. Okay, bye-bye.
Ed Harper is been with this event and the Bird Club about since day one. Ed is one of the very best birders I know. He is a retired math teacher from American River College here up in Sacramento. And Ed also likes to be known as a real good bird photographer. He's excellent in both, definitely one of the best in North America at both. And so he takes all these amazing photographs of birds, and he is always thinking about photographs that can be used in this kind of a program. So it's always very current. It's not things that he's done in the past. It's something that's brand new. And it's even if he did something just a couple of months ago, like at the Western Field Ornithologist, it's new today. That's amazing that Ed is able to just keep these things very current. And so no matter who the panelists are, they're always looking at something that's very, very new, and it's brilliant. And if you've never seen the way it works, it is something that even if you are a beginning birder, you will learn a ton from this. Just the way that Ed presents it and the way that he helps the panelists to respond to it. So you're going to have a lot of fun with this. So before I let Ed take over here, I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists, 2 longtime veterans and 2 that are relatively new to it. We have John Dunn, who has been part of the event here and part of the club forever. Thank you, John, as always, for participating. And he is going to be one of the panelists. If you don't know John, then you're not kind of current with what goes on. John is one of the very best field ornithologists in the world, but especially here in North America. Has been a longtime author for the National Geographic Field Guide. And he's been involved in practically every substantial kind of birding organization here in North America. So thank you, John. He's also a dear friend, and my wife and Sue and I just adore John. Then we have my longtime dear friend, Keith Hansen, a brilliant illustrator that lives in Bolinas. Hey, Keith, so thank you. Him and his wife, Patricia, are dear, dear friends of Sue and mine. Keith is an amazing birder. He's formerly from the Valley, born and raised in Fresno. Actually, I know that you're born and raised back in Maryland, but I think at a very, very young age, came here to California and down in the Fresno area. And that's how I got to know Keith. And then as he got his career going as an illustrator, moved to Bolinas. Can't believe how long it's been, Keith. It's been a lot of years, but lives in Bolinas there in Marin County and does his fine work there. Came out just very recently with a field guide to the birds of the Sierra, which I want to plug that. And if you want to get a copy of that, just go. I think you can get it right online with the Symposium here, or you can just get onto Keith's website and order the book there. Our relatively 2 new members of the panel this year is Lynette Williams. Lynette actually was last year, and she was so wonderful that we had to bring her back. And Lynette was kind enough to join in again. And then her longtime partner, now fiance, Conchal, is the other member. So thank you, Conchal. Both Lynette and Conchal are native to California. Lynette from the Santa Cruz area and Conchal from down south in Southern California. And I find this very interesting. So Lynette has not been a lifetime birder. but Conchow has. I guess he started when at a very young age, like at 6 or 7. But they met at UC Davis while Lynette was his TA in a flora class. So I find that adorably cute. So Lynette was his TA. She wasn't the real hardcore birder, he was, and now they're hardcore birders together. They are now both in graduate programs at UC Davis. Lynette in an ecology program, getting her master's there, and Conchow is getting his PhD in the feeding behavior of crossbills. So congratulations to the both of you on your, they just started this fall on your graduate programs and on your upcoming wedding, which is wonderful. So we are so glad to have all of you on the panel as always. And so I'm going to now turn it over to Ed, and you folks out there are going to have a wonderful, wonderful time.
Well, thank you for the very nice introduction there, David. Really appreciate that. I think we're all here because we like birds, and we only have 4 panel members this year because we're virtual. Next year, when we're live, we're going to have 5 that we normally do. And it's kind of fun when we have it live, because I can always hear what the panel is saying, like, hey, you don't want to go that way, that sort of thing. And it's kind of fun to hear the panel go back and forth. The panel is always so good in that they don't blurt out the name of the bird right off the bat. They give you all a chance to kind of ponder what the species might be, and then we kind of untangle what it is by looking at various field marks. Now, I think, for one, that looking at birds solely at a picture is pretty difficult sometimes. You know nothing about the status and distribution, for example. You don't know the habitat. You don't know the time of the year. So it can be pretty challenging. But we hope to unravel some of these things with finding some clues, and we're going to look at a lot of, see if I can get going to the right here. Let me see here. I got to make sure this goes here. There we, oops. I'm going to have a lot of pictures that are going to be from California, and also this is a shot here from Montana, my home state. And I take a lot of pictures in Montana, but I know that both Lynette and Conchow have been up in Montana, because I see their eBird reports, and they are just immaculate eBird reports, and I have great confidence in them. They're terrific birders. So just a few remarks before we get going on this thing. I'm going to try to keep this confined here to the west. We're not going to be showing you things like purple sandpipers, things like that. We're going to be things that you feel a little more comfortable with here, birds that you've seen here in the west. For example, some of you probably know that this might be a Kirtland's warbler. Yeah, but we're not going to be looking at things that are not in our area. We're going to start with a series of 5 usually, and I'll start with something pretty easy. So my idea is never to have people go away in tears because they didn't get any of them right. But we can always learn something about some of these birds, like this green-winged teal. We had a nice field trip today, and John Dunn was pointing out to everybody that these white undertail coverts here are really a very diagnostic mark on green-winged teal. So we'll talk about things like that are pretty straightforward, and I think most of you will get it on the first round. But then we're going to get successfully more difficult until we get to number 5. Now, number 5 is going to be a little more troublesome for people, and even a panelist sometimes has to go back and forth on what we have on this sort of thing. So I could give you the name, but maybe someone in the panel wants to make a guess at it. So anybody want to talk about that or not? Before we move on.
It's a golden eye.
A golden eye.
There's something about the wing pattern of the I think like median and lesser coverts that you can separate barrows and common in, right? I'm not sure.
So Barrows has slightly less white on the wing than common. This bird I would call golden-eye spa, because the wing at that angle, it's difficult for me to tell. But I would go with golden-eye spa on this one.
Well, that's wise. And it is, in fact, as it landed in the water, revealed itself to be a common goldeneye. But that's what we're saying. We have to, goldeneye can be a very complex, female goldeneye can be very very difficult to identify sometimes. So that's why we have this sort of thing. We all hope to learn something as we go through this. So we're going to start here. Look at this habitat right here, and I immediately start thinking about one of my favorite groups of birds, the raptors. So here's the preview of the first 5, and then we'll go back and start with number 1. So here's number 1, number 2, here's 3, here's 4, and finally here's number 5. Okay, we'll go back and we'll start with number 1. Okay, so we'll let someone handle this here. First raptor here. Hanshu, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so we're looking at, yeah, like Ed said, raptors and the hawk, and we can sort of narrow it down to one group of hawks. We see it has a very long banded tail, and then that sort of like dark gray upper parts, and then orange and white barred breasts sort of lead us to the accipiters, and specifically the Cooper's sharp-shinned infamous pairing of hawks. It's hard so this bird, if we can kind of see the tail tips a little bit, which is kind of the first place I like to look, and they do appear to be the tail feathers appear to be similar lengths. The outer ones don't seem to land that much shorter than the inner ones. So in a spread tail, I don't know that would necessarily be that rounded. And the eye position, I think, is something people look at sometimes. It's not super towards the bill and forward like Cooper generally is. And then like the capped appearance is not really evident on this photo because we can't see the head and profile to see if it has the dark cap of a Cooper's hawk or the even gray of a sharp-shinned hawk. But I don't know. I'm gonna go with my gut and say this is sharp-shinned hawk, or I don't know. Yeah, sharp-shinned hawk. I'm gonna say it. What is it, Ed?
Well, let's let some other people comment here, because this is why we're doing this, so we can all get some ideas. We're talking about a very difficult group of birds right here, Sharpies and Cooper's hawks. And whatever we can learn from this sort of thing is what we're after. So, John.
I'm just going to say I'm with Concha, except my leaning is in the other direction. But let's start off with, it's an adult with a red iris and the reddish underparts. I look at it, it looks moderately large to me. I see the outer tail feather is a little shorter, maybe rounded. And then we go to the legs. And the legs sort of look like tweener to me. They're not super thin. The Sharpshin's a little more spindly. Cooper's is a little thicker. This looks kind of ambiguous, and the feet look perhaps a little small. I'm wondering if there's anything about the dark slipping under the eye. Male Coopers tend to have blacker caps, but the light's shining awfully strongly. I see some blackish in there. So I'm really not sure. I would list it as a SPA if I were looking at it. And I would have, but if I had to say, I would lean very slightly Cooper's.
And Keith, are you there somewhere?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can't see your picture, unfortunately, but
Yeah, the instant this bird came on, I just kind of thought Cooper's to myself, but then as I enlarged it and looked at the tip of the tail and the face just seems a little, I don't know, Sharpie to me. Those delicate streaks in the throat, I don't remember seeing so much on Cooper's as I remember them on Sharpie. And the dark coming into the eye seems kind of like a Sharpie feature. And the tail does look a little bit rounded, but it's a little ambiguous. It looks pretty dark, snappy, dark blue-gray on the back. Yeah, the legs look, God, I thought the legs looked kind of spindly. I guess I would probably say an adult male Sharpie would be my guess.
I think we have a split panel. I think I'm with John on this one. I'm thinking size relative to prey. I think someone said that in the chat as well. So if we're assuming the prey is kind of a moderate sized songbird, it's a relatively big accipiter. And that's the characteristic that I would go off of with this photo in particular. And with the tail, it looks slightly tapered to me. So I don't know, Ed, what is it?
Well, when I was ranking these birds, I had my dear wife kind of say, Susan, what is number 1? What is number 2? What is number 5? And I had this about number 4. And she says, oh no, this is easy. She said, this should be number 1. Okay. So we made it number 1. I don't blame you,
Have
Susan.
your wife
but,
on the panel and kick us all
Yeah.
off.
But she was quite biased because this bird comes to our backyard all the time and feeds heartily on the mourning doves that come to our feeders. So this is indeed a Cooper's hawk, and one that is, when I go out and I see no birds around the feeder and so forth, I look up the tree and there's the Cooper's hawk. And it does have a nice rounded tail. And the legs, I don't think are spindly enough to be a Sharpie either. But when you can examine it at length, that's what I'm saying. When you look at just a picture, you don't have anything else to go by, that's it. So this Cooper's hawk was photographed here in Sacramento, Carmichael, on the 13th of February. Number 2.
Ed, before you leave, did you
Yep.
have, you see it every day? Do you have a sense it's a male? I mean, it looks on the smallish
Yeah,
side.
I think it's probably a male. Doesn't look as large as the ladies do, the hens. Yeah.
Does it look, when you watch it every day, does the cap, is the light hitting the crown? Is the cap a little darker than that male?
I
Cooper?
think it's a little darker, probably. Yeah, the way the lights, part of the bird is in shadow, part of the bird is, and I probably lightened it up a little bit when I was trying to salvage this picture from our tree. Okay, number 2.
Well, since I'm unsure about some of the ones coming later, I'll jump in on this. And I really was totally unsure about it, but I saw the dark on the patagial area, that's dark leading edge, which, as far as I know, is diagnostic for red-tailed hawks. So that's what I'll say. I should be able to say the age too. I can't really see much of a reddish tail, but in any case, red-tailed.
Indeed it is. You got the mark I was hoping everybody would go in on. And that this red-tailed hawk was photographed on the 2nd of October in Montana, near Valier, Montana, near Great Falls. Number 3.
Is it a white-tailed one? One of the white-tailed subspecies?
Yeah, I've got some other shots of it, and it has minimal breast band and a lot of white in the tail. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So the Criteri morph then would be
Yeah.
with
Right, right.
Montana, okay? Not a subspecies, it's a color morph, because 75% don't show the characters to make it a valid subspecies.
Is Harlan a subspecies or a morph?
That is a subspecies.
That's a subspecies. Okay.
There are other, but the Criteri is really more of a color morph.
Okay. Number 3.
Well, I have a gut feel, but someone else want to jump in?
I got a gut feel too. I'll go for it.
Good.
So we're looking at a smaller raptor, it looks like. Kind of puffed out. And if you can see the bill, it looks like a pretty delicate bill. And then a relatively long tail. So my gut instinct for this was that it's a falcon rather than a raptor. And I would call this a Merlin because of those deep, broad streaks, but interested to see what other people think. That was just my gut.
I would agree. Keith here. I think it's a Merlin. I think you're right. I also have to say that I had a Mississippi kite, immature first year Mississippi kite crossed my mind, but I don't know, the lures don't look black enough somehow, and the tail doesn't look quite long enough, but I'm going to go with Merlin.
And the dark eye right here tells us we're looking at a falcon too. I had this earlier as number one, and Susan says, "Oh no, it's too hard. Don't make it number one." So there we are. You got it right with the Merlin, probably columbarius. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to add on two quick things on this. I agree on the subspecies. It's too darkly marked, too dark in the face, and what we can see of the tail bands aren't super obvious. So agree on columbarius, the widespread boreal subspecies. And secondly, when you look for Merlins, they tend to be perched more conspicuously than this one buried in the branches. So that one, that's what gave me slight pause to be careful, because you get something buried inside the tree, it's often not a Merlin, but an accipiter. But we're all in agreement on the species, and it sounds like the subspecies too.
And this Merlin was photographed on the 2nd of December here in Sacramento at Sailor Bar. Here's number 4 of our series.
Oh gosh. This is a tough.
I'm gonna just jump in and be bold. What about greyhawk, juvenile greyhawk? That would be my maybe guess, or broad-winged.
I would agree with Keith
yeah.
and lean towards broadwing, even though it has a really good supercilium and pale ear cover. It's more like a greyhawk. I'm not sure the tail's long enough for a greyhawk, which gives me pause, but one of those two.
What about gray lined or gray barred, the one they split from gray?
Well, Ed's promised not to dip down.
Oh, okay.
Esoteric.
Oh. Yeah, my first thought was Juve broad-winged hawk, with kind of has that really white-throated look, very clean white breast, and then a pale and finely barred tail.
I will give
And there
people
was-
a little hint. It's January 17th, and we are in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
Oh,
Lynette, what was that?
I was gonna say there was a broad-winged hawk in Sacramento, wasn't there? So it's fair game for Central Valley.
Yeah, that's true.
well,
I have a bar on my computer that I'm looking at right now, and it hides the bottom part of the tail. Maybe it doesn't on yours, I don't know. But I have the little bar here on the Zoom features, and you cannot see the primary sticking out beyond the tip of the tail, unfortunately, not on my view at least.
It almost looks like it does in my view, but that would be,
I can see a primary tip.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I see that.
Pardon?
I see primaries going beyond the tail on my image,
Oh, good. I can on mine.
barely.
All right.
So regardless
hoping
of
that'll
whether
help.
regardless whether it's a juvenile broadwing or a juvenile gray hawk juvenile broadwing in January or a juvenile gray hawk in San Antonio, it's a rare bird. Unless it's you're talking San Antonio, then I worry, could it be a juvenile red shoulder, but it doesn't look marked enough underneath. And with the long primaries, but I'm going to throw red shouldered into the mix. The eastern birds look so different from ours that, but with a supercilium like that, doesn't look right for a red shoulder. So I'm still thinking it's a juvenile broadwing, but I'm now very nervous.
That's a good point, John, because I was trying to think of the other Bootios it could be. And just thinking about ferruginous and rough-legged, they would have a much narrower, sharper, leaner bill than this bird does. This is kind of a hefty Bootio bill. So I'm gonna throw those two species out for
Okay.
this bird. I still think it's broad-winged, personally.
I think it's a super bright browed broad-winged, if it is a broad-winged, but I'm still leaning towards gray, I guess, just because it's so weird looking to me. I've never seen a broad-wing that looks like this.
A good supercilium and pale ear coverts are gray hawk features. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if I'm wrong. But you know, when you're betting, eventually you got to pull the lever for one or the other.
I'll
I
go with
may have goofed up on this. I thought when I photographed this bird that it was a in its second year Swainson's hawk.
what?
I wouldn't agree with that. And also it's January, right?
Yeah, they should be in South America in January.
So if the Swainson's is completely uncharacteristic too. I've seen sort of the wing cross over from the other side and maybe a pale bar across the middle of it. So that's got me nervous too. Do you see where I'm talking about, Ed? The opposite wing. Aren't those feathers right above the
Yeah,
here.
feathers
those
there?
like,
What's going on there?
would a Swainson's hawk show a white spot there?
No.
I
I
mean,
don't think it's
the tail
but-
are pretty Swainsony. That fine barring sometimes.
but they have typically a broader subterminal band.
That's a wild looking bird. That could be a Swainson's, I guess. Shit. I don't know. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Didn't even
I-
think.
I'll see if I've got some more images later on tonight to show you, John. I might have.
Panel's baffled.
You
We
can
never
kind of
have
see
more
the,
species we've thrown out. We're no use.
huh.
So this was, like I said, January 17th, San Antonio, Texas. And I thought, well, this bird deserves some discussion. So we can all take a pass on this and think, well, but I think it was a Swainson's when I photographed it. I was amazed to have one in Texas in January.
Yeah, first winter Swainson's hawks are something, or like it's something we get to enjoy in the Delta sometimes,
Right.
But not really anywhere else commonly, and they always throw me for a loop.
Yeah, that's why I thought this was such a strange bird. Here we are. Here's number 5 of the series.
I think I know what that is.
Okay,
Right.
Keith.
I have an idea as well.
It's like a 4-year-old bald, I would guess. Bald eagle. Big yellow feet, white tail, white head. That'd be my guess. Still a little splotching in the armpits.
Well, you nailed it very well there, Keith. We've
Yellow-
spent a long time in the Raptors, so we'll keep moving along here pretty fast.
But
Indeed.
it's not a 4-year bird with the
No, it's
head,
not a 4-year bird, I don't think. No,
but it's so maybe a third.
Okay.
I think it's a 3rd-year bird. It's, if you
Are
can
they
see the
adult?
head, it has that kind of osprey look, you know, that line.
Yeah.
The
Are they
level-
adult-like in
yeah.
the 4th year?
I
Pardon?
thought they took 5 years to become white-headed.
Hmm.
Pure, fully.
But they're pretty wide-headed by third year, let alone this bird doesn't look wide-headed at all. In fact, I'm glad you took the issue of it's a bald eagle. I would have been floundering.
You
What
can
the hell
kind of
is-
see the white head protruding out a little bit in front and to the left.
I see some tail in the head. Anyway, I don't mean to, since I
Okay.
wasn't even sure it was a bald eagle, I'm not going to start arguing about the age.
Oh, well, it's got giant yellow feet and it's got a yellow bill, and I can see the osprey stripe coming through the eye from my picture.
I think it's a 3rd-year bald.
It's
Yeah.
in mold.
And this
Right.
was taken on the 30th of April in New Orleans.
New Orleans.
Okay. We'll take, whenever I see a scene like this, I start thinking about shorebirds. This is a scene from Montana right here. And let's see if we can find some shorebirds. Here's number 1. Here's number 2. Number 3. 4. And finally, here's number 5. Okay, we'll back up again. And hopefully this will go a little faster than the Raptors did. That was a tough one. Well, here we go. Number 1.
So we've got a shorebird with a big white stripe up the back that narrows it down pretty quick, and white bases to the tail, and a very prominent wing stripe. You can see some red feet poking out there too, which is pretty helpful. So that narrow, so in my mind, when I see that the white tail bases, white back stripe, and white wing stripes, that narrows it down to turnstones for me. And the brown in the back and those bright red feet make me think ruddy turnstone.
Indeed, it was April 20th at Bolivar Flats in Texas, Ready Turnstone. So that's a good number one for us. Number two.
It's like a tringa.
So we got a tall shorebird here. It looks like it's got pretty tall legs. So that would help it narrow down to something in tringa, like Concha just said. It's pretty clean on the breast. It's got some fine spotting on the back. And it looks to me like it has a relatively small bill, but I wouldn't call it small enough to be lesser yellow legs. Because for that, I would expect the bill to be about the length from the lores to the back of the head. So I would call this bird a greater yellow legs, but I would call it a greater yellow legs with a little bit of suspicion.
Yeah, I don't know. The bill, I think the bill might be fine enough to be lesser. Yeah.
I guess that's why we bird together, Concho.
And we can work these things over.
I lean in lesser to me.
Yeah, me too.
I'm delighted to see. But, you know, as much as I try to learn about yellow legs and you see a single bird, I sometimes, well, more than sometimes, struggle with them. And they're not even each other's relatives. Bill
Is it
color,
Willet closer to lesser yellow legs?
what's that?
Is
Yeah,
Willet
it is.
closer to lesser?
It is. You can tell by the wing pattern, they should be, how close they are to each other, right? Go figure. The bill color, except in alternate plumage, is good, but I think it's the way the light's hitting it. Lesser looks uniformly dark. Greater in all plumages except alternate have a gray base bill. But I guess two things hit me. It has long primary projection, and even more than that, there's a smooth gray-brown wash across the breast. So smudgy, and graders are really paler underneath with more distinct streaks. This could be a juvenile plumaged bird mainly. I don't see much sign of, and it also indicates to me that it's lesser. I'll be surprised if Ed tells me it's a greater yellow legs.
Yeah, the bill depth at the nares it looks really narrow to me. Like I feel like at the side, in the side view, a greater yellow legs bill at the nares kind of has this like taller, a little bit like Willet-like depth to it.
The legs look, Concha, the legs look a little short too. Graders look like, and green shanks seem to be longer legged, but anyway.
I hope I'm right, but my first hit just right up within 1 second of looking at it, I just said lesser yellow legs to myself. I think of graders as having a thicker based bill that has a distinct but subtle angled bent upwards, and this thing just doesn't give me that at all. The bill on this bird looks dinky and its legs look thin and its wings look long, and I think it's a lesser. That's just my hit.
Keith, you're why I like to have an artist, because you always bring something special to the panel. We need to have a killdeer in here because it would be the same size as this bird, basically. It is indeed a lesser yellow legs, photographed on the 9th of September, Harrison Reservoir in Montana.
So it's in juvenile plumage.
Juvenile.
And this is important because, of course, we don't know the date until now, but a greater yellow legs juvenile would show strong blackish streaking against a white background. So the smudginess, now that we know the date and the plumage, they're really quite distinct in juvenile plumage. And easier than trying to assess sometimes bill and length of legs and spindly and all the other things.
Okay, it was a good discussion there. Let's move on to number 3 of our series.
We have a small calidris, and this is an alternate plumage, probably not here in Sacramento, but up in the tundra somewhere like St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea where they breed. But you can see a fairly long bill with a slight droop, rufous and a bit in the ear covers, but especially on the crown and the scapular feathers, a lot of rufous, including rufous at the bases of the lower, larger scapulars. and arrow-shaped spots that extend down the sides and flanks. So this is a Western sandpiper, alternate plumage, like June or late May.
Indeed, it is June, John. It's the 13th of June, and we're in Nome, Alaska. So right on. I'll
Boom.
keep moving along. We got a lot of birds to go through. Unless you have something pertinent that you'd like to add to this bird. Did I hear you say something, Keith?
No, I was just laughing at how John nailed the date. I thought that was impressive.
Oh, he always does that. He's annoying that way. Okay, let's move on to number 4.
Can I jump in on this one?
Sure.
Yeah, of course, the shorebird, rather chunky looking with a kind of underwhelmingly indescribable bill that's not too big, not too short, just kind of run-of-the-mill bird. The barring on the flanks is really good for a red knot. So dark legs and the line through the eye. And that's what I would go with for this bird, red knot.
I'd go through a similar thought process. And when I look at a shorebird, a big group of shorebirds that are gray, and I see something rather larger than a Dunlin, really rotund, kind of thick, medium-sized bill, I'm like, what is that? And then I'm like, oh, red knot. So that's my thought process going through it.
Yeah, there's never that many of them anywhere
never
in
that many.
California. But
It's
I
always-
agree with that
And
identification.
it's always fun when you're leading a field trip to let the people ponder the bird for a while. And then you finally say to them, oh, what is it not? And then they usually pick it up.
San
Okay,
Diego has lots. I totally agree with the ID, but it's not a juvenile because it doesn't have those subterminal fringes, and looks like it has some new incoming coverts. So I'm curious where and when. And lots in San Diego, by the way, in the winter.
Oh, nice.
This red knot was photographed on the 20th of April, and we're at Bolivar Flats in Texas. April 20th.
So it's probably a 1-year-old bird. Otherwise, it would have red coming in. Hence, red knot.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we can leave this red knot behind and move on to the number 5 that you've been dreading. Okay, here we are.
Oh gosh. Okay, so we've got another small colidris. If I just looked, overall impression, and I hadn't seen the legs so nicely, I might have said a least sandpiper. But we can, because of that sort of hooded look with brown, but clearly it has these very stocky black legs and a decently long, straight bill. It's pretty, I don't know, it's pretty like, you can kind of see the wings sticking out a long ways there in the back. And you've got this sort of oval shape to it in front view. Yeah, it's, I guess maybe a Baird sandpiper, but usually we don't see, if it's a Baird sandpiper, it looks like probably an adult, and we don't see a lot of adult Baird sandpipers in the valley here. But that's my guess, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you, Conchout. The first thing that I noticed was how far those wings extend beyond the tail. So, Ed, this is probably the most unhelpful picture of a Baird sandpiper you could have possibly given us. Because once you have that, I see you. Because once you have that more profile view, you're able to see what a long sandpiper it is, like a lot longer than you would expect. A least sandpiper or Western sandpiper. And what I mean by that is like a very long, not super round body, and then really long wing projection from the tail. It's my 2 cents. I also think it's a Baird's.
I agree with both of you. I wanted to say, remember, here in California, we see overwhelmingly juveniles. So we're not on the flight path for adults, which is typically the central and western Great Plains. So I have no idea where I'd photograph this, but probably in Montana. But in addition to the wing, you can see one wing that's well beyond the tail. If you look at, there's a tertial feather there, and there's noticeable a lot of primary projection past that tertial on the near wing. And that just excludes least sandpiper immediately. I also think the bill's too long and too straight for a least, but the face pattern sure kind of suggests least. But what Count Chow's introduction, I completely agree with, and I agree it's a Baird's.
Yeah, the color, where the brown is sort of gives the initial impression to me, at least. Of least. But of course, yeah, in this photo, it's like clearly not.
Well, I've been
Well,
told over the years to make the quizzes a little harder because they've been too easy for some people because we have some terrific birders out there. But indeed, I chose this, made it number 5 because it's an unusual plumage for most of us. We always see the juvenile Bairds, and this indeed is an adult Baird sandpiper photographed on the 13th of June around the Kukarok Road north of Nome, Alaska.
Wow.
Okay.
Nice.
It's one of the American sandpipers that also breeds in the Russian Far East. So they're on the Seward Peninsula, but in very small numbers.
Let's move on. Okay, what we're going to see next here is going to be some little brown jobs, I believe. Let's see what we have here. Here's number 1, number 2, number 3. Here's 4. And here's 5. Okay, we're going to go back and start with number 1 here. And hopefully this will work better this way now. Okay. Who wants to take this first one?
I'll go for it.
Okay, thank you, Lynette.
So we've got a little sparrow. It looks like it's in a relatively open habitat, which is a nice indicator. I always like it when Ed adds habitats. What I noticed right away is the little yellow patches right above the eye. And it also has this spot on its breast amid kind of thin streaking. And then it has these bright pink legs that it's kind of doing the splits a little bit with. So with open habitat, that little bit of yellow above the eyes, the patch on the breast, pretty white bird, faint streaking. I would call this a savanna sparrow.
Agreed. And one other thing I'll point out is, well, the amount of yellow above the eye is both geographically and individually variable. Some can lack it entirely, others it's pretty bright. But if you look at there's a stripe that starts from behind the eye and goes straight back and is solid. And that's a great feature for savanna and eliminates vesper. And it also eliminates, since Ed is skulking around in Montana, eliminates Baird sparrow. So these are both features for savanna. And if you call every streaky sparrow you see in open habitat a savanna sparrow, you'll be right most of the time.
Although in this
Pasha, what plant is
sagebrush,
that?
that's a
Sagebrush, there you go.
sagebrush, and sagebrush often has vesper sparrows in it, and
Right.
especially in Montana. So that's something I'd look out for.
But that's no vesper sparrow.
No, yeah, the line going right through the center, the eye, the face not being plain.
So here we are on the 27th of June at Cottonwood Reservoir near Wilsall, Montana. And I just hoping that the sagebrush would throw people off a little bit because it's pretty obvious it's a savanna sparrow. Okay, let's move on to the next one that we have here. Number 2.
So this is another little sparrow, little brown sparrow. We can see it has an unstreaked breast. It looks pretty small and dainty with a teeny little bill, decently long tail, and then that sort of pale malar setting off a smooth auricular patch. I would say this is a Spizella based on those. And also that sort of pale eye-ring kind of in a plain face is another character that makes me think Spizella. That brown auricular patch and the crown sort of leads me to think it's one of the brewer's or clay colored herring. Since it lacks an eye line, or since it lacks a very prominent eye line at least, and has a decently defined auricular patch, I would say it's probably not a chipping sparrow. And it looks like it has a pretty evenly brown crown. I don't really see a very strong median crown stripe. The facial pattern is sort of washed out. We can't really see much of the nape, but I would lean towards brewer's sparrow. Actually, I would say this is a brewer's sparrow based on that.
I agree, Concho. The chipping always has a dark line that goes through the lores. So the fact the lores are pale eliminates chipping sparrow. Also, chipping sparrow lacks a mustachial streak on the lower part of the auricular. And this bird has a faint one, clay colored, has both a bolder postocular and a stronger mustachial, as well as Conchas has a bold median crown stripe. And that eye ring's a great feature. Brewer sparrows are pretty blah, but they sure make up for it with their song.
I've heard them called the nothing sparrow.
The which sparrow?
The nothing sparrow.
Oh, the nothing sparrow.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brewer. I know you wanted something more fancy named after you, but
I
Okay.
like them.
Well, this brewer sparrow was again photographed on the 27th of August. And again, we were at Cottonwood Reservoir, Wilsall, Montana. Moving on to our next one that we have here. Here is number 3 of our series.
Can I jump on that one?
yeah,
You
go
can-
for it.
I'm
Go for it.
just going to go ahead and say spotted towhee, juvenile. I think it's a spotted because I can get a little bit of a imagine that there's some dotting on the upper wing coverts, and I'm just going to leave it at that. It's one of those weird dark. I can't imagine it's a green tail, but I guess I don't know. I don't think it could be a green tail. I think it's a spotted toe juvenile.
We agree, Keith.
Okay.
Good ID.
And thought we'd throw in some Juve birds here for you because they're little brown jobbers too. And this spotted towhee Juve was on the 23rd of August here in Sacramento. Moving on to our next one, which is number 4 of the series. If I can get it to move.
Go to the picture.
Press the 22. Yeah.
I'm pressing with my cursor.
On the left side.
Yep. Mhm.
Oh, wonderful.
Boy, I have my cursor yet, but it's
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
this is strange.
It is.
I don't know what happened to our feed here today.
Can everyone see while we're going to be looking at spotted towhee for a while? We talked about Keith talked about the spots on the coverts. Can everyone see the rows we're talking about? It's the tips of the medians and visible there, the greater coverts. And that separates spotted from eastern towhee in all plumages, assuming you're not dealing with a hybrid, which is frequent of those two species. You can also see, which all passerines have, the pale phalanges, the base of the bill, which tells you the age. This bird's a young juvenile, just fledged, and they start molting pretty quickly into an adult-like plumage. By the time they migrate in the fall, they're hard to tell from the adults.
So just looking at this photo, how would one tell it's not a purple finch or a house finch?
Yeah,
Just
that
from
was
the photo.
my first reaction was a house finch. It doesn't have a supercilium like a purple. And then I started worrying about the horrors of the juvenile brown-headed cowbird, whether Ed was flummoxing us on that.
Its feet are pretty substantial for a house finch foot, at least. You
Yeah,
can get a pretty good look at those in this photo.
Well, the bird is that weird dark color that they have. They're really dark, kind of dull blackish gray. They're weird looking.
we don't interrupt Ed. We're just talking about towhees because maybe that's what we'll look at for the next.
Another thing about juveniles is oftentimes their feathers are just that kind of loose, coarse kind of feathering. I don't know how to describe it. Loose underneath the tummy. You can see that a little bit.
Now, what do you see?
We see.
See a sparrow.
We can see.
Okay.
I'm gonna go out on a limb on this bird. So the one field mark I see is it has a very steely gray auricular patch. And otherwise, the breast is a tiny bit streaked, like it's a baby bird, which makes it a little bit tricky. But based off of that dark auricular patch, dark bill, it's on, I think, a coyote willow.
Coyote bush?
Coyote bush.
Yeah.
I would hesitantly call this bird a bell sparrow, just based off of that gray auricular. Keith, I see you want to say something.
I don't know.
was-
I guess I don't know sparrow that well as a juvenile, but I was just going to say juvenile black-throated.
That was kind of my impression as well.
It's a black-throated. And look at the supercilium. It's broad. It's obviously not as broad as an adult, but juvenile sage sparrows, whatever's going on in terms of whitish is in front of the eye, sort of a supraloral mark. This has a lot of white going up and over the eye, and that alone indicates juvenile black-throated and make things confusing. Birds migrate in fall in this plumage up till the middle of October. So it's routine. And it wouldn't surprise me if I had photographed this somewhere on the California coast in this plumage. And if you had one in August or September in Yolo County, it could easily be in this plumage as well. So it's a juvenile black-throated.
There wouldn't there be another malar stripe in there as well?
That's true.
Or a sage sparrow.
And the markings are a little more prominent underneath in the sage and with a stick pin.
Well, right on, John. Right on. It was on the coast. It was up at Humboldt County. Photographed. We had the WUFO meeting up there, and it was photographed on the 30th of September, September 30. Black-throated sparrow, young bird. All right, let's try one more here. Here's the number 5 of the series.
So I
This is a
see.
cool photo. It's got tremendous primary projection, which is a good clue, I think. And the little squarish auricular marking behind the eye there that's so bold, plus that primary projection, plus the really chunky horizontal hugging the ground stance, leads me to think that this is a long spur. Oh, and specifically that auricular marking and the really bright wing patterning leads me to think Lapland longspur.
Agreed.
Okay, we'll keep moving along because we have lots to cover yet. Indeed, this Lapland longspur was photographed on the 12th of December at Point Reyes, out there in the Spaletta Plateau. Okay.
They're not related to sparrows.
No, they're not. Just one of those little brown birds. All right. So next, we're going to take a look at maybe some warblers here. Let's see. Here's number 1, 2, 3. Here's 4. And finally, number 5. Okay, let's go back and start then with number 1.
All right, I can take this one. This looks identical to a bird maybe last year from Puda Creek Levee Road up in Yolo County. So the first thing I noticed about this bird is it has kind of this olivey yellow sort of hood. And you can see that that hood extends from the base of the bill all the way down to the tail. And it's this very distinctive shade, but otherwise the bird is plain. It's an unstreaked warbler. It's got a full eye ring. And so this indicates a chestnut-sided warbler to me.
In fall.
In fall.
I call it a gin and tonic with a lime.
Okay, very good. This chestnut-sided warbler was on the 20th of September, and we were over at Point Reyes.
And I'm ready for a gin and tonic with all the technical difficulty.
Yes. Number 2.
Well, so it's in the black-throated green group of warblers, which are all closely related. You can see a lot of white in the outer tail feathers from the base all the way to the tip. So it's obviously not a black-throated gray, which doesn't have all that yellow. It's my first, I worry about a black-throated green, but I don't think the face pattern is right. So I think it's, if I had to guess, there's a lot of yellow up over the eye. I think it's probably a hatching year female hermit warbler. Oh, the back's not green like a black-throated green. I'd worry about a hybrid Townsend's hermit, which is very frequent in these two, but I don't see much yellow in the underparts. But I would have to admit that the face is a little darker than I see in many hatching year female hermit warblers. Still, I think that's what it is as a hermit.
Do you think that level of streaking on the flanks is normal, within normal range for hermit, or is that a little streaky?
I think it's within normal range.
Uh-huh.
Would be a little greener on the back too, I think.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with what you've said.
Indeed you are. It was we're in Sacramento at Ensel Hoffman Park. It's the 13th of September for this bird. Hermit warbler. Moving on to number 3 of the series.
Can I jump in on this one?
Sure.
Kind of a funny, odd, drab, interesting color, olivey, brownish. I'm just going to say common yellow throat, female. I'm not getting any black flecking in the lores at all right now, and it's a little dark in the cheek. Maybe it's a young male, but I think it's a very young common yellow throat.
It's a hatching, right? We agree. Hatching year female, and that's the one plumage that has no yellow in the throat. It's tawny underneath. Young male would have a lot of yellow and also black in the mask and not solid, but hatching year female.
An adult female would lack the tawny under belly.
Right.
Tricky putting it in a sagebrush.
Yeah, another one.
Yeah. Well, we're back at Wilsell, Montana again, where there's a lot of sagebrush up there, and again, it is a common yellow throat, as you're all saying. Excellent. Keep moving here, trying to catch up a little bit. Here's number 4.
Well,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I see two great marks on this bird. It's turned away. That's not too helpful, but this particular species has a huge long supercilium that goes way back, and then you can see the angle of it coming back towards the bill, and a pale mantle streak on the sides of the back. And Keith, I think I interrupt, but this is a Blackburnian warbler in the fall. I guess I can't be sure of the sex, probably a hatching year female. But I suppose it could be the spread. The leaves are awfully green, so maybe it's a spring. Anyway, it's a Blackburnian.
Indeed, it is a Blackburnian warbler, and it's the 17th of May, and we're at McGee Marsh, John.
A female, maybe a hatching year, second year female. The tail feathers are awfully worn, which indicate juvenile tail still.
Okay. And here, let's take a look at number 5, the last of the series.
All right, this jumps out to me right away as something that gets me excited. Really yellow warbler with a white undertail. So we don't hardly have entirely yellow warblers with white undertails in the West. So that gets me.
Not sure you say white. You mean tail itself, not the undertail.
Underside of the remage of the rectrices.
Okay.
Themselves are white. At least the outer ones appear to be white. Looks like the inner ones are dark. And then we can see just a bit of the wing. It's sort of olive. I don't see any wing bars, although it looks like they would be obscured by this branch. And not much of the face is visible. But just that view of the back half of the venter is like, I would say that it's probably a hooded warbler. Yeah, hooded warbler would be my guess for this bird.
Pretty
So
sharp
when you
panel.
When,
Go ahead.
when you have a tail, a yellow warbler with white in the tail, you're rapidly, your choices are down to blue-winged prothonotary hooded. And this has yellow undertail coverts, which in theory eliminates
Eliminates
blue
both of those, right?
and prothonotary. So I agree, you're down to hooded warbler. I look at the face pattern. Contra, maybe it's your roots, but you underestimate. Not much of the face is visible. Indeed, I see an eye and hardly anything else. So I'd look for a dusky lower streak, but I can't think of what else it could be other than that combination, other than it being a hooded.
And I think prothonotary has a pretty snappy spot. I think it's dark at the tip of the,
I think
Yeah.
you're right.
if I'm not mistaken.
You aren't.
And perhaps a shorter tail projection as well.
Yeah. And really white under the vent. And this bird's got pretty pink legs like a Wilsonia.
But it's not a Wilsonia.
It's Setophagia now, right?
That's right.
It's Setophaga.
That's right. Okay.
Is that
Well,
the old genus?
a lot of club members might have seen this particular bird because it was over at Davis, California, and this was a hooded warbler on the 15th of September, a few years back. Hooded warbler, very good. Got a great paneler today, really nailing things down. Well, we're going to just go out on this open prairie here, and we're open to all kinds of birds now. It looks like we're going to take a look at the first 5 we have here, and there's no particular theme here other than just enjoy these birds. Here's number 2. Here's number 3. Here's number 4. And finally, there's number 5. So we'll go back and start here with number 1. Okay. Can't hear this bird, but maybe get something on it to figure it out.
All right. So this bird, it immediately kind of screams flycatcher to me. Just the wing shape, it's got sort of a long, pretty broad tail. You can see the bill, it's pretty wide at the base. And otherwise, it's relatively plain except for a dark tail with a white, what is it, subterminal, terminal band? I can never remember.
Terminal of that.
Terminal, with a white terminal band. And I would say that this picture was probably taken in Montana, and I would call this bird an eastern kingbird.
We agree.
We'll keep moving along here. Indeed, it is in Montana. We're in Saunders County, Montana. It's June 11th, and you're right on, Lynette. Excellent. Let's go on to number 2.
We got a,
Huh? Concho, go.
oh, so we got a grebe. It's got a, short bill, kind of grayish overall aspect, small grebe. So it's one of our Podiceps grebes, and either hooded or either horned or eared. And actually the cheek patch on this one is, it's not as clean as I'd like for a horned grebe, but then if we move to the bill, we can see it doesn't have that sort of like a nuthatch-like upturned or straight topped quality. It's sort of more, I don't know, more normal, more directly pointed. And so I would call that a horned grebe based on that and the decent definition of between the cheek patch and the crown, though the cheek patch is infused with gray.
Agreed. What Concha was saying, if you look at the white, it's really extensive on the sides of the face. So it leaves a really thin strip along the nape. And eareds often show an upturned bill, but I usually look for that. And this bill looks awfully straight. Also, if you look between the eye and the bill, you'll see a pale lower spot, which is a good feature for horned grebe. And you know what they call it in the old world? The English name is Slavonia. So the big quiz I have for everyone these days is, where is Slavonia? Anyway, but Edward needs to go on.
Yes.
It's a horn grebe.
Hardgrave, and this was photographed on the 12th of October, and we were in Great Falls, Montana. Great Falls, Montana, Horngrebe. Here we are with number 3.
I'll go ahead and jump in on that. Looks like an American pipit. Looks like it's got some of its kind of breeding plumagey, pinky, salmony breast color going on there, and that funny blue-gray back color. Nice eye ring, sharp pointy bill, and looks like I'm seeing just a touch of a black leg. So I'd say American pipit. That would be my guess.
It's an American pipit. I'll just add, it has a fair amount of streaking. So it's not, and is an alternate plumage, but it's not the race, the subspecies that breeds in Montana, Alticola, which lacks streaking and is more peachy colored underneath, and genetically quite distinct and maybe a distinct species. So this is rubescens, the common.
Just I turn off the light up there.
This American pipit was indeed photographed here in California. It's March 21st, and we're on the Santa Fe grade near Merced, California. And very good, Keith. You nailed it right off the bat there.
Coming into alternate plumage.
Nailed it. All right, here's number 4 of the series.
Okay. The one thing it isn't is an Archilochus, because it's in molt. So it's missing primaries. I mean, it's in molt and it's in California, presumably. So it has new incoming inner primaries. The secondaries are above that. And also the primaries look pretty blunt and rounded. So I'm thinking it's Annas or Costas, but it's so pale underneath and on the throat, it's not an Annas, and it's pale above. And then I look at it, the ear coverts are kind of dark, and the supercilium comes back and almost connects to the sides of the neck. So I think it's a molting female type Costas hummingbird.
John, what was the first thing you said? It's molting, so therefore it's not an Archilochus?
Archilochus molt on the winter grounds, which is south, well, especially with blackchin, and it's too pale above, it's too pale, it's not green enough for ruby-throated. So blackchins, you wouldn't see molting here.
Huh.
Wow.
Right now, it's July 28th, and we are at Ash Canyon B&B in Hereford, Arizona.
Still a Costas hummingbird.
Hello.
Costas?
Yes.
Okay. Huh.
Can't see
Yeah.
the bill on that, can you?
I just thought the primaries looked really broad, but I guess they're not compared to a black chin, and the tail short,
Yeah.
like a is.
The wing shape is different. The primary shapes are different. A calypti from a Archilochus.
Right. I guess it's what's throwing me is that gap in the wing is making the primary tips, the longer primaries, look more broad like a black chin, but it doesn't look like a black chin to me. It looks like a Costas. It looks stubby, super pale and gray faced.
It kind of has this little bulge in the throat, which I've heard people mention as a Costa's trait as well.
Huh.
But I think it's really variable and hard to assess on most birds. But this one is also drinking, so maybe that's why it has that. But
Yeah. Okay, well, let it go with the Costas hummingbird there at Ash Canyon. Very good.
Cool.
All right. Moving on then to number 5 of the series.
oh gosh, this looks like probably another kingbird,
Oh,
fly catching.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I think it's a starling, personally.
Yeah, I don't know. It just looks like it's catching an insect in the air. And
Yeah,
I see on the outermost rectrix there's a faint white tip, and but not the white doesn't run up the outer web of that outer rectrix as super noticeably. So I would say maybe a Cassin's kingbird. It kind of has a little bit of a white chin as well. It's really hard to resolve, but that's my best guess is Cassin's kingbird.
it's
Well,
not a kingbird. It's not
It's
a
not a
flight.
kingbird?
No. I had, when Ed went through these initially, I wanted to say, I would have said, I have absolutely no idea what this bird is. Now that I'm blowing it up, it's in such shadow. Maybe it's paler on the throat. I can sort of see a long bill. So maybe.
Is the bill too long for a kingbird?
Yeah, it's not a kingbird. So I'll throw out a wild guess and probably totally wrong, but a white-breasted nuthatch in flight and heavily shadowed. So we're in multiple families, Ed. I think the panel, unless Lynette, you want to tell us what it is.
I
I
feel
mean-
pretty good with starling myself. But go ahead.
Darling.
I mean, I think Keith is probably right, but when I first saw that this bird, I was like, it kind of looks like a woodpecker to me. Just the way the wings are shaped and that pattern of flight just looks like a woodpecker. And then I was trying to pick out any feature and I was like, wow, this is just kind of a gray bird. And then Keith said starling and I was like, that's a gray bird. So I think I'm with Keith.
I just don't know if the wings are triangular enough to be a starling.
Well, it kind of has them up. Like, look how much the alula is out. Like when you just see them kind of soaring between the trees.
Yeah, this isn't a posture we often see them in, I guess.
This is very active flight.
It's got
I
a
think
bu-
starlings show a really buffy tip to the outer tail feathers and other tail
Oh,
feathers,
really?
if I'm not mistaken. And then that really dark tip to the primary. I don't know. That's just, I may be totally off, but that's my guess.
put us out of our misery, Ed.
Well, I always like having Keith on the panel because he sees things as they are. And indeed, when I like to take flight shots, and when this thing flew over and I took a flight shot and I says, my gosh, that'd be a good number 5 because that's pretty tough. And so if you missed it, fine, because it is indeed a European starling taken
wow.
on the 5th of October, Bozeman, Montana. A
Cool.
star, pretty short tail. You can
Hey,
see.
I'm glad it made you so happy.
Yeah.
So how do we eliminate tyrants again? Is the tail too short?
Yeah.
And then the yeah. Okay.
I don't think they have a wing shape like that either,
Mhm.
to be honest, but
Yeah.
Plus it's fly catching.
I'm not sure what it was catching, that they were feeding on these insects flying around and maybe some termites were flying around or something. They were.
I guess it could just be carrying an insect.
It just
I don't know.
caught it.
I
saw it
interpreted this
catching the air.
motion as
Yeah.
fly catching.
Yeah. It's up there with the cedar waxwings and stuff like that, catching insects. We've got a few more minutes, I guess. We stop at 6:45, so we've got a few more minutes. We have different things we go through. We can go through gulls if you like, because I see a beach like this and I start thinking about gulls. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, 4, and 5. John's doing a gull class tomorrow, so get these all explained then, but we'll go back and try number 1. And I think we can probably identify this. John?
so this is an Iceland gull. And it's if you recognize the subspecies Theri, because the wingtips are too dark, has a dark eye, rather short legs, and a rather delicate bill, slightly duller at the base. And it got lumped a few years ago, merged into Iceland gull, which McPherson recommended in 1961, until someone else came along and mucked it all up, confused the issue. Theri's gull, adult and basic plumage. I mean, Iceland gull, Theri type.
You always like this part too, John.
Yeah, there's no black on the tip of P. When you look at the underside of the wingtip, there's no pattern of black and with mirrors. It's largely pale, which is Iceland feature, and eliminates herring, as does the eye color. You can sort of see some purpley color for an orbital ring.
Very
you see
good.
Side of P10 on the opposite wing. And that's a good way to always start with looking at perch gulls. Look at the opposite wing on the underside.
Easier said than done.
Easy.
All right, we'll take no look at number 2 then. Oh, that Thayer's gull was taken at Nimbus Fish Hatchery, where you're going tomorrow, John, on the 7th of February.
Correct.
Okay, here's number 2.
Can I
Somebody
jump on?
else? Keith?
Yeah, that's a beautiful bird. I'm one of my favorite birds, Sabine's gull. That they're so well known for their 3 triangles of color on the upper surface of the wing, a white triangle, a black triangle, and a kind of a blue triangle. But for below, you can still see the translucency through the wings. You can actually see that pattern a little bit through the wings of what you would see from above. But yeah, all dark bill and the dark band to the tail.
It's a juvenile. That's why it's all smudged with brown and no real obvious yellow tip to the bill. And not to mention a big tail band.
All right, this this juvie Sabin's gull was taken on the 26th of September, and right here in Sacramento.
Wow.
Goodness.
Yeah. Okay, here we are with number 3. So we'll let someone. Lynette, let's try you on this. You've seen this
Oh,
before.
I'm trash at gulls. So I can try to narrow it down. So right away, I can tell that this is a non-Laris gull. So the Laris gulls are like Western gull. I think they're called what are the Laris gulls colloquially called, Concho?
Large white-headed gulls.
Large white-headed gulls. So you can tell it's not a large white-headed gull because it has that really thin, kind of slim black bill. So this strikes me as a Creucocephalus gull, which I like to call the cute gulls. And I would hesitantly call this a Bonaparte's gull, just based off of the silhouette. It's a really worn bird and kind of those smudgy markings on the head, but I'd be interested to see what other people think.
Yeah, the bill black, I think, totally black, slender bill makes me feel agreement towards that.
Spot on. That's what I think. And it's so worn, Lynette, because it's at least a year old and it's trashed. And it has more smudging on the head than it would in the winter. So it's first alternate plumage or second calendar year Bonaparte's gull, probably in July in Montana or something. It's not going to breed. It'd be lucky to get through its first year of life.
This bird was photographed on the 13th of June at Bedoin National Wildlife Refuge in Montana. And can you tell me why it's not a Franklin's gull?
Franklin's has a thicker, stubbier bill with at least and a much bolder hood or half hood with big white eye crescents for starters.
Very good.
You can see this bird also has pink legs that kind of under the water.
Yeah.
That's a feature of Bonaparte's. Yep, that's very good. Okay. Covered that bird very well. Appreciate that. Let's move on to number 4.
I think of Franklin's as being darker too on the back.
That's
Bone.
true. Good point.
Right. This bird's pretty light on the back. Good
It
comment.
totally eliminates Franklin's on that. So this is the way we typically see these birds when they're a year old. And they're not very attractive. In fact, looking at worn summer gulls is something that should be avoided. But the bill color is kind of apple green with a dark tip. This is a second calendar year or 1-year-old California gull.
Okay.
It's got those kind of puke green legs too.
You went to the Western Field Ornithologist meeting in Reno recently. This was photographed there in Reno on the 12th of September, and indeed it is the California gull. Okay, and let's move on to this last one here, number 5.
Keith or Concho?
I'm not going to touch that bird. I have no idea. I just guess maybe a herring gull.
Yeah, I was noticing that staring pale eye and thinking likewise. It's definitely not an adult. It looks like it's putting in some, yeah, it's got super worn secondaries and outer primaries, and then it's putting in some nice, fresh, new inner primaries. Another summer gull.
I'm see Dawn flashing. Gull,
So
big
I guess,
But
yeah,
I had
herring
I had-
gull maybe, but
I had the reaction, the bill's too small
for a herring gull.
for herring. I mean, it's
Uh,
got big,
it's not
and so I think it's a 1-year-old ring-billed.
I
Yeah,
was
also-
thinking ring-billed too, as someone who has just said in front of 120 people that they're trash at gulls. I think it's a ring-billed gull. The head, it doesn't have kind of the square shape that I associate with herring gull, and it almost doesn't look mean enough, you know? Herring gulls always look like a very menacing gull to me with a very angular head, but this gull looks a little too benign for that.
That's a good way to look at them.
Its
Herring
feet
gulls do
might-
look-
Its feet might be yellow. You can kind of see them. It's
I
hard to
tried-
resolve that.
Anyway, you have a divided panel. I think you have 2 herrings, two who favor herring gull and 2 who favor ringbill, a 1-year-old bird. But keep in mind that ringbills take 1 fewer years to reach definitive adult plumage. It's a 3-year gull. So if it's a ringbill, it has to be a year-old bird. If it's herring, it's 2 years old.
I'll give you the date. It was June 28th. We're at Clark Canyon Reservoir near Dillon, Montana. So it's getting pretty late for herring gull there in Montana. So if you know the date, the 20th of June, that's really late for herring gull. So shall we lean for ringbill gull then? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, ringbill gull. All right. Kind of helps you know the date sometimes on these birds and know distribution status that way. Let's see our time. Well, we only got about 2 minutes left.
You want to go through?
this.
But why don't you go through the
real
next bit,
fast here.
just without explaining why? We'll just call them
Yep.
what they.
Okay, that is a what?
Northern
I didn't hear you.
Northern Mockingbird,
Northern Mockingbird, number 2.
Clark's Nutcracker,
Okay,
Agree?
number 3.
Bufflehead,
Agree?
Got a pretty good panel, don't I?
Yeah, wow.
Red Phalarope,
Agree? Big white wing stripe, plain gray, upper parts, stubby bill,
Red-headed
woodpecker.
Yeah, can't stump you guys. You're pretty good.
American Goldfinch,
American goldfinch.
Yeah,
Okay,
Palm Warbler,
right. Western palm.
White-throated
White-throated sparrow.
Yeah, okay, we can go through these pretty fast here.
Swamp,
Okay,
Swamp sparrow. With all that red in the wing. A boodio.
Broad-winged hawk,
Red-tailed hawk.
well, so number
would-
5 at least, so slowed you down a little bit on that one.
I'm slowed down. I don't think it's a broadwing.
no, probably a red tail, or maybe
The date is May 11th, Mather Lake, Sacramento County.
No, probably not a broadwing. Red tail.
Red-tailed hawk, yeah.
Agree.
yeah.
Well, it's 6:45. I'm supposed to turn into a pumpkin or something at that time and let you all go. I'd like to thank the panel for helping me so much on this thing. So next year it'll be virtual. I have 5 panel members and we can see your expressions and hear your remarks as you're going through. And it'll be a lot of fun for you that way. So
Yes.
make sure. you
Ed,
make-
I just want to say thank you, Ed, for I know how challenging this is for you. I know that you are very meticulous, but thank you so much for just hanging in there, Ed, and doing this. I know that you did not like going through all that downtime, but thank you, Ed. Thank you, panel, and thank for all of you that were listened in on this. Good job. Good job.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Take care. So we are going to take about just a 15-minute break here. Come back in a couple of, in about 15 minutes, and Pat will introduce Alan Fish for our evening program. Thank you.
Okay, good birdie, everybody. Okay.
35 years, Alan Fish has directed the Golden Gate Audubon, Raptor Observatory. And he has kept the atmosphere there collegial, cooperative, just extremely science-based, but also humane, and much like Alan is. It turns out that we actually went to Davis together, but I am older than he is. But Alan is a UC Davis alum. He taught avian biology there, and then he became the director of GGRO and has done it for the last 35 years or so. And, you know, it's a really wonderful program, and I'd urge all of the Bird Club members to get up to the hill one of these days. It's in Marin County. You couldn't ask for a more spectacular place to watch hawks far above the north tower of the Golden Gate, and support the program as well. So Alan, take it away. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Thank you for that. Yeah, 35 years. I started when I was 7. So look forward to this conversation, and Pat and CVBC folks, thanks very much for having me. This is a really nice thing to get to do. I have spent a lot of my life around Davis, and just driving across the Delta today, it's just so darn beautiful and open, and the rivers are gorgeous. And I wanted to stop and birdwatch the whole way, but I was getting across the valley quick. So look forward to tomorrow. Hope some of you are going to join us on this the Waverly Flood Area Drive for Raptors. And if you have to miss it, that's maybe we'll figure out something else sometime. So I'm gonna hit my share screen and jump into the program today. Oops, there we go. Boom. Pat or Jen, can you give me a thumbs up? Just make sure I'm showing everything right.
It's showing and it looks beautiful.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'd like to give a really broad overview of the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. I haven't spoken to CVBC before or at the symposium, and I have so much to share with you guys. I'd really love to cover a lot of different topics, and I also know that you're science savvy, so there's a lot of great crossover with Western field ornithologists and with other groups, but I'm guessing that this will be new for a lot of people. I also like to embed the GGRO story in a real broad picture of what the world of raptor migration science is, at least from my perspective. So bear with me. I hope this is interesting for folks. And I'm going to start off by acknowledging the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, who's employed me since I got started at GGRO at 1985 at the age of 23. They kept me out of grad school, which sometimes is disappointing to me, but I've had a great opportunity working with a huge range of scientists and publishing papers on GGRO work, so I've done pretty well. The Parks Conservancy is also they jumped on board the GGRO as a community science or citizen science operation long before it was a popular thing to do. And at the time, a lot of people told me that we should involve volunteers because they were cheap labor. And it took me only a few years to realize volunteers are not cheap labor, they're expensive labor. And they require a lot of teaching and relationship building and evaluation, and they deserve dignity and respect and a chance to give feedback, and some of them last a long time and some of them don't, and it's a big complex of stuff, but I really admire the Parks Conservancy's range of work now. We do work way beyond raptor migration counts. We have wildlife picture indexes and bee studies and monarch butterfly studies and a lot of native plant restoration, all of which is based on a commitment to bringing people into the urban national park, the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which was set up in 1972 to reach a range of people of the Bay Area and really all of Northern California who may not be able to afford the ticket to Yosemite or be able to get there on a moment's notice. So we're still exploring, I would say, the depth of what an urban national park can be and can do. And it's an exciting place to be with a lot of wonderful young people that inspire me a lot to do better and think more broadly about conservation biology. So you probably know a lot about where we are, but we're located in the right near the north end of the Golden Gate Bridge. We're about a 15-minute drive from the North Tower, winding through the Marin Headlands. The roads in the headlands have changed a little bit in the last 5 years because there's so many darn people in San Francisco that the place was getting a little bit congested. So next time you come, be sure you take a look at your Google Maps and come in from the right direction. I'm going to shrink down a little bit, show you the Marin Headlands more broadly. One of the things I like to see in this picture is a really beautiful range of transverse ranges. You know, we think of the Coast Range as being a long north-south stretch, and certainly that contributes to the raptor migration being funneled from as far as British Columbia, south into the headlands, and then south down to Mexico. But also there's a lot of really interesting transverse ranges just in the micro part of the headlands, which contribute immensely to the wind direction and the uplift opportunities, the updraft opportunities for raptors on migration, which is a huge part of the micro migration story within the Marin Headlands. Here's a little bit better look of where that red dot is Hawk Hill. Somebody liked the word Marin Headland so much they put it in twice. Probably the same guy who named Walla Walla, Washington, but you can see how close we are to the water. Hawk Hill is 940 feet above the Pacific Ocean or above the water of the Golden Gate. So losing birds in the terrain is a really big problem. And it's taught me a lot about when you can count a hawk and what kind of hawk migration studies you can do up there. And I'll dip into that a little bit as we speak today. So we're looking fairly eastward from Rodeo Lagoon there on the right side in Fort Cronkite, the buildings Fort Cronkite. And there's Hawk Hill up there at the top with the little red dot. Hawk Hill used to have a pretty good grove of Monterey cypress and Monterey pines. About 700 trees got pulled down in 2012, 2013 to promote about 9 acres of restoration for the Mission Blue butterfly, an endangered butterfly that relies on really, really short lupins that get crowded out by trees really fast. There's the Golden Gate Bridge just behind the hill back there. So we're looking from the Pacific Ocean or close to the Pacific across the top. And actually, I'm going to pause just a minute because this picture reminds me so much of the landscape that we were in. Many of you might have been in back on October 18th, a month ago, when a willow warbler was seen in the Marin Headlands and tracked for the better part of 2 weeks. It was a wonderful, interesting ornithological event, but it was punctuated by an event of deep, deep sadness that my mentor and friend, and the friend and mentor of, I'm sure, many of you, Dr. Dave DeSanti, collapsed with a heart attack during that willow warbler search and died not too far from where this picture was taken. It was very, I would say, confusing and sad, and at the same time fitting for a man who had contributed so much knowledge and interesting ideas and out of the box thinking about vagrancy in songbirds, and his work on the farallons, his pioneering work on setting up map stations and convincing the Forest Service this was a profoundly important way to collect data, annual data on songbirds. I miss Dave a lot. We didn't talk very often, but he was the first person I called when I got started at GGRO in 1985 and gave me a lot of inspiration and a lot of friendship and a lot of advice on how to get things going. So just like to stop and dedicate this program to Dave and the memory of Dave DeSanti. Hawk migration work everywhere really all goes back to Hawk Mountain, Pennsylvania. And If you've never been to Hawk Mountain, I highly encourage you to do it. It's an incredibly beautiful, beautiful hardwood forest with these beautiful big rocky talus slopes. Interestingly, in my vernacular, being a Sierra Nevada Bay Area kid, I would call these talus slopes. In Pennsylvania Dutch, they call them kettles. And if that word rings for you, it might be because you know that a group of hawks soaring is called a kettle. And interestingly, that grouping word was invented right here in the 30s and 40s at Hawk Mountain, Pennsylvania, when they would see a 100, 200, 300 broad-winged hawks over the rocky area that they called the kettle, which is, of course, where the thermals were hot. And so that's where the broad-winged hawks would fly. And Keith Bildstein once explained to me that they used to say many, many, many decades ago that the broadwings were over the kettle, and eventually it turned into there's a kettle of broadwings. So kind of a nice perspective to get. I'd like to go a little deeper and go past the 1930s and remember that this is the location for generations of shooting of raptors that was done in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And shooting raptors was, of course, something that all of our ancestors did. My grandmother in Woodside, California, was the expert shot in our family, and there were a few Cooper's hawks mounted on the mantelpiece at her home because of that. Not proud of that, but it is just part of the storyline that we all come from, and something to think about. So in Hawk Mountain, Pennsylvania, back in the early 1930s, in Pennsylvania Game and Fish Department in the 30s would actually offer a bounty on hawks, but those guys were clever. They offered a bounty on hawks, but they offered it as a $5 a head bounty on goshawks, northern goshawks. So imagine how many goshawks you've seen in the last year, and think about how many red-tailed hawks you've seen, and imagine how many might be flying over Pennsylvania in the 30s. And those numbers are not too far apart as far as proportions go. In other words, the Pennsylvania Game and Fish Department didn't have to pay out on too many goshawks, but a lot of hawks were shot up on Hawk Mountain, Pennsylvania in the decades preceding 1933. So here's our goshawk coming by. Oh, I missed the goshawk. So there was the $5 bill. I'm going to keep continuing. Oh, I know you guys want to see a goshawk, so I'm going to do that anyway. Previous. And I think that's the goshawk going to come through. There we go. Look at that guy. It was actually photographed over Hawk Hill about 10 years ago by David Jesus. And there's the $5 bill. So 1933, a young bird watcher named Richard Poe went up to Hawk Mountain, collected with his friend Henry Collins hundreds and hundreds of non-goshawk raptor skins that were lying around from the shooting that had been going on just that season, and piled them up and gave us photographs in a variety of different angles and locations that look like this. He took these photos to New York City Audubon Society, shared them with a wide group of people in early 1934, and the person most upset about it was this lady, Rosalie Edge. And Rosalie Edge is a worthy person to read up about. She was something of a Boston Brahmin, kind of a matron of the arts, but she actually was seriously one of the first eco-lobbyists in the world. She advocated for a lot of the national parks, especially in the West, being built onto. She promoted 800 acres of Mariposa sequoia trees. And when she heard about Hawk Mountain, she put together a group of investors, bought a 1,400 acre chunk of the mountaintop, decided there would be visitors allowed, but no guns would be carried up to the top of the mountain. She knew that this couldn't be done without some great compassionate bird-wary overseers. So she hired a husband and wife team, Irma Brune and Maurice Brune, who were living up in Vermont in their mid-20s, and asked them to come down and take a job protecting this new Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, which has the distinction of being probably the first non-game wildlife sanctuary in the country, if not in a big part of the world. Now, this was a really interesting thing, and Rosalie is reported to have said to Maurice that this might be somewhat of a dangerous enterprise. And interestingly, Maurice maybe didn't take that seriously enough because he was the bird expert. So he was placed on top of Hawk Mountain where Rosalie could count on him on counting all the birds going by so that they could keep track of the impact they were having with the purchase of this property. In the meantime, Irma, all 5'2" tall, stood at the gate down at the bottom of the mountain, about a mile below the count site, and told generations of coal miners they couldn't carry their guns up onto this ridge line anymore. Who would you want to be, the gatekeeper or the hawk counter? So interesting to think about. By the late 1930s, this became an incredibly well-visited location with a lot of love for birds. And this conversion of a raptor shooting site to an early form of ecotourism was really an incredible success. It took a few years to get it going, but it really did turn around. Among the people who showed up as a regular person, showing up starting as early as about 1945, 46, was a young nature writer from Maryland that you know well. Her name is Rachel Carson. Rachel would go up to Hawk Mountain with her friend Shirley Briggs. And I don't know when this picture exactly was taken, but it was taken by Life magazine and probably after she won the National Book Award for Edge of the Sea in 1952. So anyway, she was at that point getting a little bit famous. But by 1958, Rachel was racing the clock on getting Silent Spring done. Why was she racing the clock? Rachel was struggling with cancer, and she did not know how long she would last. So once she decided she was going to commit to writing this book about DDT, she was really collecting up data and information as fast as she can. And what I love to think about it, that there was a point probably around 1959, 1960, where she might have been standing up on Hawk Mountain or sitting up there, and Maurice Brune was sitting around and they were counting hawks together, and she realized the data opportunity of this data collection that Maurice had been collecting because Rosalie Edge told him he had to find out how many birds she was saving, actually was a reasonably important wildlife monitoring tool pre-DDT, which started about 1948, and post-DDT, because now we had data to about 1960. So this is the conversation I'm sure that they had up there. And okay, maybe not exactly, but in my mind, this is how this is how the stage play, this is how the musical Rachel works. And I've thought a lot about writing this musical now that Hamilton has, been done. Rachel obviously needs to be done. There actually is a letter that is available, I think, online in 1960, where she asks Maurice what kind of data changes he's seen. And here's basically what she learns. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of this. Over 25 years, 1934 to about 1960, what Maurice saw was that he had declining rates of bald eagles. And that interestingly, because he'd been collecting data on the different ages of bald eagles, both juveniles and subadults grouped, they would be called immatures, and adults, he was able to make ratios of immature to adult birds and discovered that that ratio had dropped from 1 to 1 to about half to 1 by 1960. So we have immatures declining faster than adults, and we have declining eagle rates. Rachel takes this as information that actually implies that DDT is not only causing a decline in birds, but it's causing a decline in young birds and really stopping raptors, at least, from breeding. And of course, that's what she wrote in Silent Spring. And Silent Spring kicked off a tsunami of environmental work from its beginning in 1962 and moving along until the 1970s, when we get the EPA, the ESA, the Clean Water Act, and in clean air, incredible range of stuff that sort of got spun into place from the beginning of Rachel Carson's work. So I really love the connection here. It's a really interesting way that all this came together. I also love it that Rachel was intuiting something about DDT based on that Hawk Mountain count that wasn't shown chemically to be going on for another 5 years. It wasn't until 1967 that biochemists in the lab in Britain showed that DDT and calcium get bound up in the female raptor, and then some of the raptors get particularly hard hit. Osprey, peregrines, bald eagles, pelicans. Why are those birds the one that get hard hit? You may know this, you may not, but I'll just add, it took me a few years to figure it out, and conversations with people like Dan Anderson at UC Davis, that these are the birds that are, let me back up a little bit. DDT is a lipophilic molecule, meaning it lands and collects in the lipid layer of birds and fish and the variety of animals that impacts. So it's the animals that have a lipid layer, and generally for those are the aquatic animals, fish, ducks, and these are the animals that eat them. So osprey, peregrines, bald eagles, pelicans are eating a lot of fish and ducks. They have a lot of lipids, and that collects up and becomes magnified in the predator, and then of course the damage occurs. So post DDT, we have an increase of bald eagles. They bounce back eventually, 1980s to 1990s. The number of immatures to adults jumps back up to a good healthy rate. And by 1999, bald eagles and peregrines, for that matter, are delisted as federal endangered species. So I like to take that tangent. I know it's a little bit of a round robin, but it really helps understand the background of the beauty of Hawk Mountain and hawk migration work and how it's embedded deeply in conservation. And now I'm going to go a little deeper. Remember that guy, Richard Poe, who took those pictures with his Kodak Brownie camera of all the dead raptors up on Hawk Mountain? Richard Poe was so inspired by this whole saga that Rosalie Edge could actually buy property and save it for nature without it being a hunting refuge, that he decided he would start an organization built around that. And he and a group of friends in 1951 founded a group that we now know and hopefully love, called the Nature Conservancy, with well over 1 million members and at least 1 million acres around the world saved for nature. Irma, maybe not quite as exciting, but I have to tell you that in 1991, I got a call from Vice President for Audubon, just ran out of my head. I'll get his name later, who said, Irma's alive, Alan, Irma's alive, and she lives in Modesto and nobody knows who she is. Can I bring her up to Hawk Hill? And we had an incredible day where at 83 years old, Irma regaled us on top of the Marin Headlands in a little leather chair, her little legs swinging at the end of the chair. And she actually used the phrase, bullets whizzing by my head. Bullets whizzing by my head. I will never forget thinking, I have the easiest job in the world because this woman and Maurice Brune were the pioneers that changed so much thinking about raptors for so many people. This is a map of hawk migration sites around the world circa 2002. It's actually probably about doubled in red dots now. And these are sites that get at least 10,000 raptor sightings per year, confirmed and suspected. And it really is to say now, with the background in your head of Hawk Mountain, Pennsylvania, that these are critical monitoring sites for raptors around the world. And of course, not all the raptors of 360 species of Falconiforms, Ixopidradae, Falconidae, Pandionidae, all those birds, not all of them are migrating. Not all of them can be captured at migration sites, but many of them can, something like 2/3 to 3/4. So it's a really great opportunity to use these as tools, conservation tools, in order to monitor raptors. By the way, the biggest raptor migration site in the world, what is that? It's Veracruz, Mexico. That little dot just below Texas on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. At peak years, they see 3 to 8 million raptors, mostly broadwings, Swainsons, turkey vultures, and a medley of kites migrating down the coast and along the Sierra Madre, and they get squeezed down there at the Veracruz coast. It's an incredibly beautiful thing to see if you ever get a chance to watch it. The Golden Gate migration is pretty simple in some ways. And by the way, it was noticed first in 1972. I should say it differently. It was noticed first by a European white guy in 1972 by Dr. Lawrence Binford, who was the ornithologist at Cal Academy, who figured out from birds flying by his window at Golden Gate Park that there was probably a migration site nearby akin to the Hawk Mountain phenomenon. And he explored a little bit in the area in San Francisco and then up in the Headlands, and discovered that this magnificent flight was going on. So these are the sort of simple way of looking at it. Raptors get a little bit funneled by not wanting to cross over the water, but to the east and to the west, and eventually appear in the little white donut above the Marin headlands, and then mostly probably cross to San Francisco and south for however long they go. And one of the great mysteries of the raptor migration at the Golden Gate is some birds we know are going to Argentina, certainly some Swainson's hawks. Some broad-winged hawks are certainly going to the Amazon basin, some osprey to the Chilean coast. And then there's a whole lot of in between. And there's probably a decent number of raptors that move north of the Marin headlands as a net movement in the winter as well. The same thing that makes it an attractive place for humans to live, of course, moderate winter climate makes it an attractive place for some raptors to stay put, and some raptors simply migrate to this area. I'm not going to do a detailed run through of the 19 diurnal raptor species, but I thought it'd be good for everybody to have it in your heads. 6 species of bootios, soaring hawks. Particularly interesting is, of course, the broad-winged hawk, which is one of the 2 species that are really the only species that doesn't nest nor winter near the Golden Gate. So it's the real passer through. The broad-winged hawk as a phenomenon was kind of an exciting thing that Binford figured out, that there were broad-winged hawks predictable on the California coast at the Golden Gate. And now, just to let you know the numbers, we see more broad-winged hawks annually than we see ferruginous roughleg and Swainson's combined. So the annual phenomenon of broadwing seems to be stepping up a little bit in number every year. Accipiters, the forest hawks, sharp-shinned Cooper's goshawks. As you might imagine, sharp-shinned coop and red-tail and turkey vulture form the big 4 and probably account for about 90% of the migration. Goshawks are one of our rarest species. Goshawks really don't have any place to go coming through the Marin headlands or past the Marin headlands, so they're fairly accidental as far as when they show up. And we see on average about 0.4 goshawks per year. 4 falcons have been seen. Actually, 5 falcons have been seen in the Marin headlands, but the 4 that are regular are these guys: prairie peregrine, merlin, and American kestrel. I got to tell you, 35, 40 years ago when I got started at the Golden Gate, I thought I might never see a peregrine in the wild, and kestrels were a dime a dozen. And now peregrines are all over the place in the Bay Area and many around San Francisco, the Golden Gate, and kestrels are getting really hard to find. So it's an interesting time. I mentioned a fifth falcon. The banders in Golden Gate Raptor Observatory picked up a Eurasian kestrel in 2007. We put a paper together for Western birds that probably many of you have seen. The white-bellied or white-rumped raptors is just my obnoxious way of grouping up these 3 species. I'm going to jump over to the large dark raptors, balds, goldens, turkey vultures. And just a reminder that not all bald eagles have white heads and white tails. And this is one of the reasons Maurice Brune was able to age the bald eagles going by. This is a juvenile here with the brown body, and the white wing pits are the great, great field mark that keep you from calling that bird a golden eagle. So I'm going to touch on this in one slide. This is the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. A big part of our mission is not just tracking and monitoring raptors, but actually tracking and monitoring raptor biologists, or at least launching environmental science professionals and ornithologists and wildlife biologists and a variety of conservation biologists and naturalists and people working in agencies and consultants and as academics and in nonprofits. It's been super satisfying over the years. We've trained over 2,000 volunteers in raptor science and methods, more than 100 interns, about 50% of whom have gone on to graduate degrees. And actually 2 of them are presenting during this conference. Robin Smith is talking about shrikes tomorrow, and the incredible Lily Douglas, co-author of the new Sacramento County Breeding Bird Atlas, was a young puppy biologist at Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. So I can't tell you how I'm proud of these careers and these trajectories and these superb individuals who've just made the opportunity to create a Raptor Observatory and use as a launching pad for doing good in the world and promoting bird conservation and environmental awareness and problem solving and all the good stuff that this word can lead into. But I'm going to talk mostly about our community conservation science work. What is community conservation science? Well, community science is the terminology that we use at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area to mean what you might hear of as citizen science. It's pretty much the same thing. But in a place like the San Francisco Bay Area, there's sometimes a little bit of an edge about what the word citizen means. And some people are actually put off by the possibility that their status as a citizen or as a non-citizen might be challenged or threatened or laid open by their work in science. So we use community science as an alternate word for that. There's also a great program at UC Davis in the education department called the Institute for Community and Citizen Science. And they've also taken the lead on trying to reach as wide an audience as possible in order to incorporate ideas of promoting people in science, both as volunteers, but also as teaching opportunities and as professionals that can grow from these projects. I want to just jump into 4 areas and give you an idea of how we're structured. We do hawk counts that are largely based around population trend work, similar to what Rachel Carson taught us about the data set at Hawk Mountain, Pennsylvania. We're doing trapping and banding. As many of you know, we band between 1,000 and 2,000 raptors a year. I'll touch a little bit on the details of that. Early on in the world of raptor banding at Gate, we realized that the privilege of holding a wild raptor for 20, 30 minutes really needed to be met by the highest level of ingenuity on the part of our staff and volunteers to do the best we could possibly do for the raptors while we had them in hand. And the net result of that is an incredible amount of work studying the physiology and the stressors of the raptors in hand that we've had while we have them. And we do that through occasional blood sampling. If we have a project we're working on that involves blood, like rodenticides or looking for mercury, we also do that with feather samples, which provide us potential information on, because they have a little bit of skin, on DNA, as well as an opportunity to look at other toxics and metals as well. So some really interesting work about the health of raptors that comes out of that. We've done a fair amount of radio and satellite tracking at the Golden Gate, some of which we've published, much of what we have not, but the data are still intact, and it's one of my goals before I retire to get those papers out. And then also we've been starting work just in the last 5 years on vulture ecology, led by raptor biologist Teresa Ely, who's pictured there measuring the beak of a turkey vulture subadult in hand. So let me jump into, just to mention, currently we have about 130 volunteers contributing about 25,000 hours annually. These are volunteers of the National Park Service, and the Raptor Observatory is part of the nonprofit Friends organization. So our staffing, our managers, are nonprofit biologists. We have 2 seasonal staff and 2 full-time staff right now, including me. And then we have a variety of shared staff that work on data analysis and publications and office management as well. So I'm going to just run through a few cases of what I would call some of the highlights of some of the data that we've been collecting and give you a feeling for it. And the trend graphs I'm going to show you are pretty much hot off the presses. They show data from 1992 to 2021. So this is a nice 30-year spread showing annual red-tailed hawk trends over time. We're actually working on a detailed long-term trend analysis right now with several PhDs at the Forest Service and a Forest Service biostatistician in order to do a very close trend analysis from Golden Gate hawk counts combined with breeding bird survey data for that species, combined with Christmas bird count data for Northern California for the species as well. and we're doing all 19 species. That's a presentation that we should be able to make in about a year, but we've been working on that for the last 3 or 4 years to get that ready. This is a little more of a less technical approach to the same thing. Many raptor species at the Golden Gate have a pretty typical predator cycling that happens, and they end up showing a fairly static line with very little increasing. Oh, by the way, we've tossed out 2 years here. When you've done work over 30 years, you run into some years that just for some reason you had to bag, and it's kind of an interesting part of this work. 2010, we had to bag because the Park Service decided to rebuild the road up to Hawk Hill, and we couldn't get volunteers up to the top of the hill to count except for weekends because it was wet, hot tar during the other part of the year. 2013, we had to jettison because the first 16 days of the fiscal year, October 1st to 16th, Ted Cruz held up the federal government in a budget lockup. And as a result, we missed 16 days of having volunteers in the national park lands counting data. You can imagine how much fun that was for all of us at the peak of the season to lose 2.5 weeks of data up on Hawk Hill. So red-tailed hawks, pretty status quo over time. We're not seeing any great movements up or down of that inclination. Peregrine falcons, probably our best example of a data set that's actually corroborated at other locations. You may know very well that in 1970, there's a statewide search for nests for peregrine falcons, and it yielded 2 nests in the entire state, 2 active nests in 1970. That was done by Steve Herman. More recent numbers estimate, no one's been able to do an accurate count or a 1-by-1 count, but the estimates are 400 to 500 nests for peregrines in the state of California as of the last few years. So this is nicely corroborated, although it does look like we've hit maybe the asymptote, maybe the peak of peregrine activity as far as that goes. Kestrels, God, how depressing. The kestrel thing is really hard to see. I'm sure all of you remember kestrels just being a dime a dozen bird. And in places like the Central Valley, I think the numbers seem pretty good, but I really think that the big problem we're seeing with kestrels is based on our superb elimination of large insects. Kestrels, shrikes, many of the passerines, the insectivores. I think the insect declines that have happened in California in my 60-year lifetime have just been profoundly damaging to these birds. And I think kestrels are losing it, and not just California, but obviously all over the country. It's really hard to see. There may be also in many of these some climate change stories that I'll touch on a little bit, but one of the things suggested by many of my colleagues is that we seem to be getting some raptors that stay farther north for the winter because of moderate winter climate, and also because of the excessive amount of bird feeding going on, especially in urban areas in places like Seattle and Portland and Saskatoon and Edmonton and a lot of the northern cities of the continent. So it could be very well that in some cases, particularly bird feeding with migratory sharpshins and Cooper's hawks, that we may be slowing down the migration that actually makes it to as low a latitude as a place like San Francisco. Just as a quick summary of the 30-year trends, we're seeing increases in merlins, peregrines, bald eagles, Swainson's hawks. Those are all statistically significant. We're seeing decreases, none of which yet have been shown statistically significant, but for the long term in white-tailed kite, harriers, and kestrels. Kestrels get very close to being statistically significant. And then in the last 5 years, sharpshin, Coopers, and red shoulders seem to be taking a downturn that I'm pretty concerned about as well, but we'll see if they bounce back. That's going to be the interesting test. So where do these birds go? What are the populations we're actually monitoring? Well, we're still doing raptor banding because raptor banding really gives us a lot of data because the band recovery rates are pretty significant. So we've banded almost 46,000 raptors in 40 years. 9 species have been covered, band recoveries for about 1,750, which gives us about a 4% band recovery rate. This isn't an absolutely current band recovery map, but it shows many of the band recoveries through about 2010, I think. So the colors you're seeing are red-tailed hawks in red, green is Cooper's hawks, yellow are sharp-shinned hawks, and then there's a smattering of kestrels, merlins, and red shoulders and peregrines and harriers as well. Since 2015, we've been also using color bands with large visible identification alphanumerics, and on red shoulders, red tails, and Coopers especially, which has increased some of our red tail recoveries up to 8%, which has been fabulous and partly born on the shoulders of the incredible bird photographers working in the last 10 years, getting awesome photographs of birds and publishing and posting on social media. So that's really benefited us as far as being able to track more birds for the same amount of work as far as banding goes. This is a band recovery map that was published in a book published by the American Ornithologists Union called Status of North American Birds back in 2008, and the chapter on raptors published by Lori Goodrich and Jeff Smith shows a wonderful series of the different raptor migration sites, mostly run by Intermountain Bird Observatory up at Boise, but also Hawkwitch International, Echelon Ridge, Bonnie Butte, Goshoots, and the Manzano Sandias. And it really gives a sense by color of the raptor flyways based on band recoveries. The baby blue ones are all from the Golden Gate, and you can see how tightly they hug the California coast and how wonderful this really expresses the Pacific Flyway. One of the things I remember talking to Dave DeSanti about in 1985 was how wonderful it was that we had a chance here to actually describe the Pacific Raptor Flyway, which had never been described fully. And not that we've described it for all of the species, but for red tails, Coopers, and sharpshins, we have a pretty great picture now of what the extent east and west and north and south of those flyways are. We have a lot of other species to work on, of course, but those are the big band recoveries for the numbers of birds that we banded. I want to mention a few other topics, a few other, I'll call them case studies for interesting work that we're doing. And a lot of this, the next few topics come from a wonderful 20-year collaboration we've had with UC Davis Laboratories, and in the last 15 years, led by Dr. Josh Hull. Josh's father, Buzz Hull, was the banding director at GGRO and the research director for most of the first 20 years. And Josh Hull was inspired to go into a life of bird conservation biology and is a PhD who is a branch chief at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service working on a range of vertebrates and invertebrates, but focuses some of his lab's attention at UC Davis as an adjunct professor on raptor work with the Golden Gate. One of the more interesting studies we've done in the last 5 years and done by a PhD student just completing his work this year, Ryan Borber, is to actually start to use metabarcoding to analyze what fuels raptor migration, and specifically the sharp-shinned hawks and the merlins, which, as you know, are songbird specialists, or at least avian predator specialists, bird specialists, and the opportunity to collect what Ryan cheekily calls jerky, the jerky off their feet and off their beak with a little alcohol swab, put it into a little jar, and then take it to the genetics folks up at UC Davis and do the metabarcoding in order to understand what it is that that sharp-shinned hawk or that merlin has been eating. The Merlin data I'm not going to show you today just because there's so much great stuff here, but we published it in IBIS about a year ago for the British Ornithologists Union Journal, where Ryan's still finishing up his sharp-shinned analysis and has developed a really interesting approach where the menu of species that sharp-shinned hawks select, which I'm about to show you, there's the data or the sample collection. We've been able to uncover 53 different bird species on the lips and the feet of sharp-shinned hawks over the course of several years. And here, bird species list. No, I don't expect you to read 53 bird species names in 0.6 font, but we're going to look at the top 12, which are 2/3 of the prey were these 12 species, which is kind of interesting to think about why those 12. And what sharp-shinned hawks, what were they selecting for? Is it Is it forests? Well, not entirely. There's some non-forest birds in there. And is it ground birds? Some of them are canopy birds. So it's an interesting mix of birds. Some of them are eruptive species like red-breasted nuthatch and arguably yellow warbler, and maybe American robin could be considered eruptive, but some of them are pretty standard and steady numbers as far as things go. So it's an interesting mix. What Ryan did that was really exciting is he's actually compared this list of species now against the eBird records for a certain circumference of area around Golden Gate, around the San Francisco Bay Area, in order to understand something about what the menu was that sharp-shinned hawks were selecting their prey from, and understanding the selection process. And what I love about this is Ryan has combined this massive, beautiful eBird data collection system of community science work with this very localized, very tight micro selection of community science work of banded birds at the Marin Headlands, and combined them to understand something about what sharp-shinned hawks select to fuel their migration, at least as far as San Francisco Bay Area and the Pacific Flyway go. And this information is probably, we're going to be preparing the manuscript over the next few months, and will probably be available in the year's time, but really exciting work. And of course, it raises a lot of questions once you start looking at this stuff of the phenology and the timing of accipiter migration, and the phenology and timing of prey migration, and how climate change might impact both of those birds in a kind of cascade misalignment or a desynchronization of a pattern that's been around for many, many, many years. So exciting stuff that we get to work on. Along that line, some of the work we've been doing is to actually move beyond just population trend analysis. So using the hawk count data, not just to consider the trends of birds, but actually to consider the possibility of phenological change, meaning shifting peaks of migration and shifting starts and finishes of migration. And this is some early work that was done at UC Davis, also under Josh's tutelage by a grad student, an undergrad actually, named Olivia Wong, who we've worked with now for about 5 years, to look at just Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks, to look at the timing of the accipiter migrations over 25 years, and be able to make a chart that I can't show you that little one, but I'm going to show you a bigger version. But first, I want you to understand a little bit of what we looked at. When you're doing climate change work and combining it with migration peaks, it's very valuable to look at least 3 components. The start of migration, so often done as the first 10%. The peak of migration, often done as the 50% point in terms of mass or volume of birds coming through, and abundance, and then 90% abundance at the end of the migration, to understand how the migration tails off. This is a migration profile across 25 years that sort of shows classically how the Cooper's hawks move through the Marin Headlands, and the chance to look at peaks and shifting peaks is what Olivia did. So with Cooper's hawks in the top, Olivia found no significant change for any of the Cooper's hawk migration, a little bit of an incline. You can see how those charts go up just a little bit. Down at the bottom, the horizontal side is year, over 25 years, and the Julian dates on the left side and the vertical. So we don't see any significant changes for Cooper's hawks. There actually was statistically significant changes in sharp-shins, showing a 7-day delay to the start of migration, a 5-day delay at the 50% mark, and no change at the end of migration. So how do we interpret this stuff? Well, we're still working on this, and we're in the process actually of doing all 19 species in a thorough analysis now of 30 years of data. But the accipiter and stuff is interesting because many of us see accipiters, Coopers, and sharpshins as these very tightly related species that are really hard to tell apart, and they fly in really similar manners, and there's a high number of unidentified accipiters that we see at the Golden Gate, being honest with you. But really, here's what we found out, is that Cooper's hawks have a fairly static migration phenology, but sharp-shinned hawks have delayed as much as 7 days at the start end and 5 days in the middle. Why should this be? And in my mind, it's really based on sharp-shinned hawks not only being a high prey specialist. Cooper's hawks are actually pretty flexible in their predation. They also rely on a fairly tight coniferous forest as far as nesting species goes, nesting habitat goes. They breed quite a bit deeper into the far Pacific Northwest. Cooper's hawks, the breeding range barely goes up into Alaska, and they really stay in the broadleaf forests, but nowhere near up the Canadian provinces that sharpshins go up into Alaska. And then they're smaller. Sharpshins being so much smaller, they're of course needing to feed more rapidly on specialized prey. It sort of sets them up to be more impacted by the prey migration itself and needing to respond to that and potentially respond to a climate model. I'm not actually saying that this is a climate impact because of course, we're just collecting data here. We have a lot to learn about climate delays and climate shifts in migration. Some of the modeling on bird migration has climate shifts for fall migration that start earlier, as well as climate shifts that start later. So right now we're collecting the data, we're looking deeply into it, asking the deeper questions, and starting to get a sense of what contribution we can make at the Golden Gate. I want to touch a little bit on broad-winged hawks just because we've got some interesting data that some of you may have read about also in Western birds. Broad-winged hawks again are super exciting to me because they don't breed in the Bay Area or in Northern California, and they don't winter in Northern California except by mistake. So we have this really wonderful migration profile that pretty much starts around mid-September and pretty much finishes before Halloween, and a really nice spike that shows the peak of migration. The broad-winged hawk breeding range sort of is confusing, and I added a little bit there because in the last 15 years since this map had been made, broad-winged hawks seem to be extending a little more into northern British Columbia, into areas around the Peace River lowlands, into aspen forests. And they seem to be following one of those range extension that kind of mimics what barred owls have done and what blue jays have done and what black-capped chickadees have done, where they've followed what used to be a grassland. They've followed the building of forest belts based on human shelters and human building, and followed them from the East Coast to the Pacific Coast. So broad-winged seem to be following that pattern. And it's not unreasonable to think that some of these broad-winged hawks might come from Western Canada, come down the Pacific Coast past San Francisco, and follow their migration down to the wintering zone, which can be as far north as Mexico, but for the most part is the Amazon basin. You can see the alternate path is sort of a Mississippi River path, probably a Rocky Mountain path as well, as far as the far western British Columbian and Albertan broad-winged hawks go, eventually also disappearing into as far south as the Amazon basin. One of the things that many of you might know is that we see something like 3 to 5% dark morph broadwings at the Golden Gate, which is what the picture on the left is, juvenile dark morph, and that the dark morph broadwings are mostly known to nest in Alberta and British Columbia as far as breeding range goes. But the truth is there's very, very little field ornithology going on up in those far northern latitudes, and a huge need for a lot more research up in that area. What I do want to show you is something fairly simple. This is not deep science, but over the years we've trapped and banded and radio tracked as many as 5 broad-winged hawks. And I want to take you through a tracking of 2 broad-winged hawks, one banded in 1994, one banded in 2012. Yes, 18 years apart from each other by volunteers at the Golden Gate. And I want to show you these because of the incredible tightness of these 2 migration routes. So both of these birds were released in late September in the Marin Headlands. They both overnighted a roost site in that donut up there in the Marin Headlands. And I'm going to give you donuts around the first roost site after the Marin Headlands, which are about 26 miles apart there in the Coast Range, the Gavilan Range, actually east of Monterey. The third night roosts are very much closer to the coast, but only about 16 miles apart. Again, keep in mind, again, these are two different birds, 18 years apart that we've been tracking. The fourth night roosts are about 8 miles apart, and the fifth night roosts just south of the Mexico border are almost just a little bit under 2 miles apart. So a really incredible bit of tracking that had these birds. Not necessarily, you can see that the tracking lines come together and diverge and come together and diverge, so they don't track exactly perfectly. And that final coming together, coming down the San Jacinto Mountains, makes a lot of sense that the raptors would be migrating along the peaks as they travel into Mexico there near Tecate. But just the ability of two birds to match their migration routes over a gap of 18 years, both juvenile broadwings, I might add, was pretty exciting bit of data to get, and something that I still marvel at about the what I think is really a lot of genetic instruction to follow certain maps that we don't always think of raptors or any bird migration as following a kind of genetic map. But I think there's a good case to make that many birds have genetic maps that they follow on migration. Mexico, woohoo. So let me just close up by saying these are just a few stories of many, many interesting stories, some of which we've been able to publish, some of which are still in data form, that range from urban nesting studies, Cooper's hawks around the Bay Area, especially Berkeley. You can see the Cal Falcons bird there as a project that we've been working on for a few years. Osprey nesting around the San Francisco Bay Area, the increase of osprey is a project that the GGRO has been very involved with. Studying with the Hull lab up at UC Davis, West Nile virus and other disease and ectoparasites, really looking broadly, again, using banded birds at an opportunity to think of raptors as suffering from stresses at a physiological level that might have population level impacts. We actually found back in 2005 that of a whole lot of red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks sampled, that red shoulders have as many as 13% of birds had West Nile virus antibodies. They survived the real smackdown of the first round of West Nile virus in 2004, and they were surviving it with some level of antibodies a year later in their system. That was really exciting to learn about. We've been able to do some really interesting population genetics with the samples of birds coming through the headlands. We've worked with Josh Hull's lab again on sharp-shinned hawk population genetics across the country. Red-shouldered hawk population genetics showing that there's very, very, very little genetic transfer between the Texas population and the California populations of red-shouldered hawks, and potentially a case to make that these are actually different species of birds for the little bit of genetic transfer that long distance between any real transfer between those east and west populations. We've been able to work on poisons and metals, publish some papers on rodenticide loads in raptors. Up to 8% of juvenile red-tailed hawks are carrying a little cocktail of rodenticides in their bodies, even though they've only been flying for 4 or 5 months in the wild because they're juvenile birds. So some really interesting results there, again, looking into stresses of what these wild raptors are experiencing. So what's next for the GGRO? Well, a lot of the same in many ways. I have to say, keeping this migration monitoring going on for another 4 decades is my highest aspiration. I won't be here to do it, but I'm thrilled with the young professionals that have come both through GGRO and been promoted into incredible work in the world, and exciting to think about the next few decades of people. To really think about, a lot of bird migration work is done for the longest distance birds, operating on highly genetically programmed migration schedules and routes and locations for breeding and wintering. And one of the things that really interests me is how raptors locally and regionally are making a decision when there's a whole lot more behavioral flexibility built into the migration tendencies. So I think that's an opportunity we have, being in such a moderate winter climate. If we were in Duluth or in Juneau, Alaska, or somewhere in the far north, we'd have a lot different stories going on. But we have this moderate winter climate as well as an increasingly moderate winter climate to work with. So it's a good chance for us to think about that. What are the stressors on Pacific region raptor populations? That's just really the bottom line, is how do we contribute to a conservation biology understanding of these birds? So just a few of the things that I'm thinking about. The human population density, I have to say, is big in my mind right now. In 1985, when we started, 83, 84 actually, when we started working on the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory, California's human population was about 25 million. It's somewhere up around 40 million now, 41 million. And in another 40 years, it's going to be double what it was in 1983, 84. We're going to be up at 50 million at least. So some big changes ahead, and big changes for resources, big changes for potential impacts, big changes for the urbanization of California, things that we don't necessarily want to think about, and given how long they will be going on, are going to be gradual and hard for us to interpret, but a big part of what a program like this, I think, can do. I want to end up just with a few pictures of our incredibly lovely community of people at different groups. This is a Hawk Watch team a few years ago, with taking a moment up on Hawk Hill to stop and say cheese for the camera. Teresa Ely, our raptor biologist / banding director, in the middle, with Carmen De Leon, who's one of our program coordinators, and then on the right side, Lynn Schofield, who's a biologist for Institute for Bird Populations, all of whom were launched in their careers at GGRO, and a handsome red tail. Just a lovely peregrine falcon flying over the very tippy top of the Golden Gate Bridge. At the peak of migration pre-COVID, we had a lot of wonderful opportunities to encounter the public up on Hawk Hill, and played up to the opportunity to introduce people to birds of prey and the magnificence of the migration that was happening right overhead in this urban area. We went a little bit undercover during COVID. We basically stopped doing public programs, but next year we're going to kick back into public programs to start bringing the public back up to Hawk Hill in a big way. Handsome American kestrel, tracking a Cooper's hawk across the Golden Gate, getting a little bit of lift, and then migrating the 1 mile gap. At its shortest, that Golden Gate Bridge gap is actually just about exactly 1.0 miles between Marin County and San Francisco. Lovely shot of a red-tailed hawk against the backdrop of Fort Cronkite. If you look closely, you'll see a little partial leucism in there. Releasing a Merlin after banding. This is Robin Boothby, a long time GGRO volunteer biologist. Releasing accipiters. Our magnificent juvenile red-tailed hawks. Years ago, a friend of mine, Charlotte Kisling, said, "I know how to teach people raptor identification. You just have to ask yourself, why are you not looking at a juvenile red-tailed hawk?" So that's the 2-minute gauge to start with. Juvenile red shoulder, 2 awesome young interns, both of whom now have about 5 years of experience doing raptor migration work and are about to start grad school. Scanning raptors, Tamalpais in the background. Close up of a big-eyed Sharpie adult. How you can help raptors. I don't feel like I really need to tell you folks about how to help birds, but I have to tell you, over the COVID era, if I was shocked by anything, it's that just science teaching needs to be a lot better, as well as helping young people break into the environmental science field. I feel like I grew up in a time where the popular vernacular at a place like UC Davis was to weed people out of professional science because they might not be good enough. And at this point, we can't afford to weed people out of science. We need them more than they need us. And if they can't do calculus, if they can't do stats, there are plenty of people who can. We need creative, far-reaching, liberal arts-minded, problem-solving, intersectional people of all kinds to be attacking the environmental problems of the next 40 years. And we need to encourage the betterment of science teaching and science journalism. It's never been more important, and I know you all agree with me, so I'll shut up. Thanks for tonight from the Central Valley Bird Symposium team. I've admired the work of the club for many years, and Pat just gave me a copy of the Sacramento Atlas. What an incredibly great publication you guys just produced. Bravo to Ed and Lily and the gang who worked on that. And all of the great support staff that we have down there at the Golden Gate. I'm just going to run through these and say thank you for your time and attention. Thanks to my photographers. I'm not a photographer, so I really appreciate these people because a good Raptor image can reach a lot of people, as this Sharpshin testifies. So thanks, everybody. I don't no idea what time I'm on. Oh, it's not too far from 8 o'clock. Good. So there's still time for questions. So Pat, Jen, I'm going to do a stop share, right?
Can.
Yep.
Yay.
Thank you, Alan. That
Cool.
was fabulous. That was great. We had one question that asked, like, how many goshawks have you seen up there?
How many goshawks have we seen? Boy, I think the average, as I said, the average is about 4/10 of a goshawk a year. We had 1 year where we had as many as 11. That was mid 1980s. So it's been a long time since we've had a goshawk flight of any kind. And I'll just be totally honest that when you're up on a hawk hill and you're spending a lot of time doing what I call the sharp-shinned Cooper's hawk dichotomy dance, there very likely have been a few, especially male Juve gosses, that have gotten lumped into a Cooper's hawk category. But I really think it's certainly less than one a year, and there's just no real evidence that we're getting much of a goshawk flight. And when we do see one, it tends to generate a ton of excitement. We actually did have a goshawk, I think probably a pretty good goshawk sighting. The people who picked it up a few weeks ago on a really high line, just a ventral view, super high above Hawk Hill, never slowed down. It was after a day of looking at accipiters, and this bird just was a hugely different bird. And the two counters who were working for us both have goshawk experience, but neither of them could quite see enough detail to tell it to age. And so I actually went ahead and threw it in the unidentified accipiter camp, but I do believe that these two folks did see a goshawk.
Yeah, it would always be a really exciting day. I mean, rough-winged hawks are the pizza birds up on the hill. So if your team gets a roughie, then theoretically you get a pizza. But a goshawk, I can't even imagine.
So Pat just outed me that we have one bird at the Golden Gate that we actually have food incentive. And that might be seen as influencing the data collection, but it's sort of a competition among the different teams to see who can get the first rough-legged hawk of the year. And I'd suggest that it was maybe unscientific, except for the fact that we've had that incentive for now 35 years. So we've been consistent in our food incentivizing. So I think it's still okay.
Yeah. You know, everybody can come up to the hill. You can't get up. There's gates now with COVID, so you can't get up right up to the peak of the hill where the team is counting. There's a team up there every single day, only for 2 more weeks, only till Thanksgiving, right? The week of Thanksgiving, Alan?
Yeah, let me speak to that. So first of all, I know there have been rumors that Hawk Hill is closed because of COVID. It's only the very tight summit area where we're doing the quadrant count that we've been told by the Park Service, if we have volunteers, we need to keep a fence up so that we don't have to check people's, vaccination cards and stuff like that. So there's plenty of great places right next to the fence and nearby the middle platforms that are still great viewing spots, and the teams are really good at screaming, hey, we've got a Farouj overhead if something like that is happening. The count continues till December 4th. this year. I don't think, I'm sure a lot of you know that there's a potential to see interesting Bootios right on into mid-December. We used to band actually until January, but given some of the COVID restrictions we've been under, we've started to wrap everything up in December, just so we can all breathe easy in the holiday season. So, but yeah, there's a pretty good flight. The teams are out through December 4th. So
Okay.
feel free to please come up and join us. If not this year, for sure, next year you have to come.
Next year, kind of the best time, the next, mid-September through mid-October is.
Yeah. Really September, October are the best months. But we get some really fun diversity of species in November, October,
Mhm.
November too.
Mhm.
The peak usually happens somewhere around September 25th. But it's been shifting into October some years, the last 10 years. So it might be as late as October 6th or 8th, and there might be some significant climate shifting going on.
Yeah, and you can't beat the view, as I say. It's a place that you just simply can't beat the view. Well, Alan, thank you so much. That was a really wonderful presentation, and I'm so glad that you could be in our program. And the people that are signed up for Alan's trip tomorrow, you'll have a treat. And hopefully we'll get you back here one of these days.
That'd
So-
be terrific, and delighted to be with you guys, and look forward to meeting some people tomorrow and seeing some great birds together. And thanks for all the wonderful notes in the chat as well. It's been an honor, and Pat, thanks very much for inviting me.
Welcome. Yes. So everybody, we'll say goodnight now. And the link for tomorrow's program is different than today's program. So you will be receiving that, or you may have already received that in your email box. So use the Sunday link, or what's today? It's the Saturday link. And that will get you into tomorrow's program. And Scott Weidensahl will be the keynote speaker at, I think, 3 o'clock. Is it 3 o'clock tomorrow? David starts at 3, and then Scott will be coming on at 3:30, and he will be talking about bird migration, the whole subject of bird migration. So thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, Alan. Good night.